Long before the first history books were written, someone was already building for eternity. They carved mountains into temples, balanced massive stones with astonishing precision, and created monuments that have outlived kingdoms, religions, and even the languages of the people who built them. Today, satellites can map every corner of these sites, and lasers can scan every surface. Yet many of their greatest secrets remain untouched. The more closely we examine the ancient world, the less ordinary it appears. Familiar explanations begin to fall short, while new discoveries continue to challenge assumptions that have stood for generations. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about these places is not their age, but the possibility that they still know something about our past that we have yet to learn. Naqsh-e-Rostam rises from a nearly vertical limestone cliff in Fars province, Iran, approximately 6 kilometers northwest of Persepolis. 4 monumental tombs were carved high above the plain, their cross-shaped facades appearing less like excavated chambers than pieces of royal architecture transferred with extraordinary control onto the face of a mountain. European travelers described the monument centuries ago, but systematic archaeological investigation developed during the early 20th century. Ernst Herzfeld documented the site and copied the inscriptions of Darius I during the 1920s and 1930s, followed by excavations conducted between 1936 and 1939 under Erich Schmidt and the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. Their work confirmed that the cliff contained the tomb of Darius the Great and 3 closely related royal monuments constructed by his Achaemenid successors. The tomb of Darius, completed around the time of his death in 486 BCE, established the design followed by the others. Its facade forms an enormous cross cut directly into the rock. The central horizontal section reproduces the front of an Achaemenid palace, complete with columns, capitals, beams, and a rectangular doorway. Above it, Darius stands before a fire altar beneath a divine symbol, while the platform below him is supported by representatives of the peoples under Achaemenid rule. The other royal tombs repeat this arrangement so closely that they were clearly produced from a controlled architectural model rather than independently improvised designs. That repetition creates the central engineering problem of Naqsh-e-Rostam. These were not facades assembled from blocks that could be measured, adjusted, and replaced. Every column, figure, and architectural line had to be removed from a continuous cliff surface. A mistake made too deeply could not be repaired by inserting another stone. The builders therefore had to transfer a large, symmetrical design onto an irregular wall, establish its central axes, and preserve the intended proportions while working many meters above the ground. The facades are positioned high enough to separate the royal chambers from ordinary access. Their entrances sit near the center of the cross-shaped compositions and open into rooms excavated deep inside the mountain. This required 2 different forms of accuracy at once. The external sculptors had to control the visible geometry of the facade, while excavation teams had to cut inward without weakening the rock around the doorway, ceiling, or burial recesses. Since the finished monument concealed much of the working process, archaeologists can reconstruct the probable sequence only from tool marks, unfinished surfaces, and comparisons with related Achaemenid tombs. Scaffolding made from timber is the most practical explanation for access, yet the precise arrangement remains unknown. A structure wide enough to support groups of stonecutters would have required large quantities of wood, secure anchoring, and constant adjustment against the cliff. Ramps would have demanded enormous volumes of material, while suspended platforms alone would have made the removal of heavy stone debris difficult. No surviving construction manual explains which system was used, and the temporary equipment disappeared long ago, leaving the finished cliff as the primary evidence. The question becomes even more difficult when the design is considered at full scale. A worker standing close to the stone could see only a small section of the composition. The complete proportions could be judged only from the plane below, where supervisors would have needed a reliable method of communicating corrections upward. Horizontal reference lines, plumb lines, measuring rods and cords could have provided the basic geometry, but they had to remain consistent across a rough natural surface that was neither flat nor uniform. The builders may also have prepared smaller plans or proportional grids, although no original architectural drawing for the tombs has survived. The repeated palace facade suggests that the craftsmen were not inventing these forms on the cliff. They were translating established Achaemenid architecture into stone. Columns are positioned beneath carved roof elements, doorways occupy the central axis, and the upper reliefs are organized around the king. Yet copying a familiar building did not make the operation simple. Three-dimensional architecture allows columns to be placed independently, but a rock relief must create the illusion of depth while remaining structurally connected to the cliff. Too much excavation around a capital, figure, or beam could fracture the projection and destroy months of work. This makes the surviving reliefs especially remarkable. Dozens of human figures appear in carefully ordered registers above the tomb entrances. They differ in clothing, weapons, and headdresses, identifying groups within the empire, but remain integrated into a balanced visual system. The sculptors had to maintain readable details, even though the reliefs were intended to be seen from far below. Their solution was not miniature realism, but calculated exaggeration. Clear profiles, strongly defined garments, and carefully separated silhouettes that remain visible across distance. The tomb of Darius provides the strongest identification because its inscriptions name the king and present his political and religious message. The other three monuments are usually attributed to Xerxes I, Artaxerxes I, and Darius II through their position, style, and historical sequence, although they do not all identify their occupants with the same certainty. What is unmistakable is that later rulers deliberately reproduced the visual formula created for Darius. Such repetition implies standard measurements, trained teams, and a method for preserving proportions across generations. It does not mean that every line is mathematically flawless and erosion prevents claims of zero deviation. The real achievement is more convincing than that exaggeration. Different craftsmen, working during different reigns on separate areas of uneven limestone, repeatedly produced facades that remain recognizably governed by one architectural system. The geology itself had to be understood through experience. Before carving began, builders needed to select areas free from dangerous fractures and determine whether the rock could support deep chambers behind elaborate reliefs. Limestone can be worked more easily than granite, but it is also vulnerable to bedding planes, water penetration, and detachment. The survival of the tombs for roughly 2.5 millennia indicates that the chosen sections of cliff were sufficiently stable, even though parts of the reliefs have suffered erosion and damage. Below the Achaemenid tombs, later Sasanian rulers added enormous reliefs depicting investitures, royal victories, and encounters with Roman emperors. 9 Sasanian panels were cut into the rock beneath the earlier monuments, turning the cliff into a political landscape used by different empires over more than 1,000 years. Their placement also required careful reading of the surviving stone, since new recesses had to be created without destroying the royal tombs above. Facing the cliff stands the Kaaba-ye-Zartosht, a precisely built stone tower whose original function remains disputed. Proposed interpretations include a ritual structure, a royal archive, and a funerary monument, but no explanation has achieved universal acceptance. Its carefully fitted masonry and strict geometric form reinforce the impression that Naqsh-e-Rostam was planned as more than a group of isolated tombs. It was a controlled ceremonial environment in which architecture, landscape, and royal ideology were made to reinforce one another. The deepest mystery is therefore not whether the Persians possessed supernatural technology, but how much practical knowledge has vanished. Their builders clearly understood surveying, proportional enlargement, stone behavior, and large-scale organization. What has disappeared are the drawings, scaffolding systems, measuring procedures, and chains of command that converted those skills into 4 monumental facades on a nearly vertical cliff. Borobudur, Central Java, Indonesia. More than 1 million blocks of volcanic stone rise into a geometric mountain so precise that it still challenges modern engineering over 12 centuries after its completion. Rediscovered beneath dense tropical vegetation in 1814 during the British administration of Java under Sir Thomas Stamford Raffles, the monument emerged from layers of volcanic ash, jungle roots, and centuries of abandonment, revealing not simply the world's largest Buddhist temple, but one of the most accurately planned stone structures ever created without written engineering records. The first mystery appears long before a single stone was placed. Borobudur was not constructed on a flat bedrock plateau, but on top of a natural hill composed largely of weathered volcanic deposits, an unstable foundation in one of the most tectonically active regions on Earth. Central Java lies near the converging Indo-Australian and Eurasian tectonic plates, where frequent earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and exceptionally heavy rainfall constantly reshape the landscape. Building a monument weighing hundreds of thousands of metric tons on such terrain should have created progressive settlement, uneven sinking, or catastrophic slope failure. Instead, the entire structure has remained remarkably stable since the 8th or 9th century, despite surviving more than 1,200 years of seismic activity and annual rainfall often exceeding 2,500 millimeters. Modern geotechnical studies indicate that the builders deliberately reshaped the natural hill before construction, creating an enormous artificial platform rather than relying entirely on the original terrain. Even so, no surviving inscription explains how they calculated the bearing capacity of the hill, how they estimated long-term soil compression, or how they anticipated the immense load distribution produced by roughly 55,000 cubic meters of andesite stone. These calculations normally require knowledge of weight, pressure, and settlement that is rarely associated with early medieval construction. Yet Borobudur continues to stand with only limited structural deformation. That remarkable stability becomes even more puzzling when viewed together with the monument's extraordinary geometric precision. Borobudur consists of 6 square terraces supporting 3 circular platforms crowned by a massive central stupa, forming a carefully organized 3-dimensional mandala nearly 123 meters across. Every terrace maintains remarkably consistent proportions despite the enormous scale of the project. More than 2 million stone blocks were assembled into a coherent architectural system in which even small cumulative measuring errors would have produced dramatic misalignment near the summit. Laser surveys carried out during modern conservation projects reveal that, although centuries of natural movement have introduced minor distortions, the overall symmetry remains exceptionally accurate for a monument built without iron surveying instruments, optical levels, or modern measuring equipment. Archaeologists still debate how the builders established such reliable reference lines across an irregular hill while maintaining consistent orientation throughout successive construction phases. The stones themselves deepen the mystery because they were assembled without mortar. Instead of relying on adhesive materials, the builders shaped individual andesite blocks, so they locked together using tongues, grooves, notches, and interlocking joints. Each block became part of a gigantic 3-dimensional puzzle capable of resisting both gravity and horizontal movement generated by earthquakes. Andesite is a dense volcanic rock that is considerably harder to shape than ordinary limestone, requiring enormous labor to achieve close-fitting surfaces across millions of contact points. The precision becomes even more impressive considering that the stone was quarried several kilometers away and transported without wheeled vehicles or draft animals commonly associated with heavy construction elsewhere. Every block had to reach its intended position with dimensions accurate enough to integrate seamlessly into an increasingly complex architectural framework. No construction manual survives to explain how this immense logistical operation was organized, or how quality control was maintained over decades of continuous building. As researchers continued examining the monument, another astonishing achievement became impossible to ignore. Borobudur functions as a sophisticated hydraulic system as much as a religious sanctuary. Tropical rainfall falling onto thousands of square meters of stone should gradually force water into joints, weaken foundations, and trigger erosion along the slopes beneath the monument. Instead, the builders incorporated an extensive drainage network consisting of concealed channels, carefully graded surfaces, stone gutters, vertical drains, and more than 100 sculpted gargoyle-like spouts, known as makaras, that discharge water safely beyond the terraces. These features continuously divert enormous volumes of seasonal rainfall away from critical structural elements. Modern restoration has repaired damaged sections, yet much of the original hydraulic concept remains effective after more than a millennium. The existence of such an integrated drainage design implies detailed understanding of water flow, surface gradients, and long-term erosion, despite the complete absence of surviving engineering documentation. The monument's orientation introduces another layer of precision that remains only partially understood. The four principal stairways align closely with the cardinal directions, while the entire architectural composition follows an ordered cosmological plan representing the Buddhist universe. Achieving accurate cardinal alignment without magnetic compasses or precision astronomical instruments required systematic observation of the sky and careful measurement over extended periods. Scholars have proposed that solar observations, stellar alignments, or shadow-based surveying methods may have been employed, but no direct evidence identifies the exact techniques used by the Sailendra builders. Whatever method they developed produced an architectural layout that remains strikingly consistent across one of the largest stone monuments ever constructed in Southeast Asia. The artistic program demonstrates an equally astonishing level of planning. Borobudur contains 2,672 narrative relief panels extending for approximately 5 kilometers if placed end-to-end. Alongside 504 Buddha statues distributed according to a carefully structured symbolic system and 72 perforated stupas surrounding the central monument. These reliefs were not carved randomly after construction, but integrated into the architecture itself, meaning sculptors and builders had to coordinate every wall, corridor, and staircase long before the final stones were installed. A single mistake in sequencing would have disrupted both the religious narrative and the ceremonial path, followed by pilgrims ascending through successive levels of spiritual symbolism. Such coordination strongly suggests that the entire monument existed as a complete conceptual design before large-scale construction began, even though no blueprint, master plan, or architectural drawing has ever been discovered. Perhaps the most intriguing clue that the builders were constantly refining their calculations lies hidden beneath the visible structure. Excavations revealed that Borobudur originally possessed an exposed lower base, later enclosed within an additional encasing of stone, now known as the hidden foot. This massive modification required enormous quantities of extra material and labor, after significant portions of the monument had already been completed. Engineers continue debating why such an extraordinary decision was made. One possibility suggests that the original foundation experienced unexpected outward pressure from the hillside, forcing the builders to reinforce the lower terraces before structural instability became irreversible. Another proposes that the alteration reflected symbolic rather than engineering concerns. Because no contemporary records survive, the true motivation remains uncertain, leaving open the possibility that the monument itself preserves evidence of ancient builders responding to complex structural challenges in real time. Abu Simbel, southern Egypt. Twice each year, the rising sun enters a mountain and reaches a chamber more than 60 meters inside. The temples were never truly lost, but centuries of drifting sand gradually buried their facades. In 1813, Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt recorded the exposed upper sections, and 4 years later, Giovanni Belzoni cleared enough sand to enter the Great Temple. Carved during the reign of Ramesses II in the 13th century BCE, the monument appears at first to be an overwhelming statement of royal power. 4 seated figures of the pharaoh, each approximately 20 meters high, dominate a facade cut directly from the sandstone cliff. Behind them, however, lies an achievement more difficult to explain than their scale. The entire interior was excavated along an axis designed to receive sunlight on only 2 brief periods of the year, carrying it through successive halls until it reached 4 figures seated in the deepest sanctuary. At sunrise around February 22 and October 22, a narrow band of light crosses the entrance, passes between the colossal pillars of the first hall, continues through a smaller pillared chamber and a transverse vestibule, then reaches the rear wall approximately 63 meters from the facade. For several minutes, the light illuminates Ra-Horakhti, the deified Ramesses II and Amun-Ra. The 4th figure, Ptah, remains substantially within the darkness. This is not simply a doorway facing the general direction of sunrise. The sun changes its rising position along the eastern horizon every day as Earth moves through its orbit. To select 2 mornings separated by roughly 4 months, the builders had to identify the required solar declination, establish the corresponding direction on the local horizon, and transfer that direction into a tunnel extending deep into solid rock. The opening, floor, walls, ceilings, and sanctuary had to function together as one optical system. A small angular error at the facade would have become a significant lateral displacement by the time the rays reached the rear chamber. Across a distance of 63 meters, an error of only half a degree would shift the beam by roughly 55 centimeters. A deviation of 1 degree would produce an offset of about 1.1 meters, enough to move the light away from the intended figures. The builders therefore needed far greater control than simply watching where the sun appeared and cutting in that direction. They had to compensate for the visible horizon, the elevation of the entrance, the height of the sanctuary figures, and the changing vertical angle of sunlight immediately after sunrise. The problem became even harder because the temple was not assembled from adjustable blocks. It was excavated inward from a natural cliff. In a constructed building, individual elements can be repositioned as work progresses. At Abu Simbel, removing stone in the wrong place was permanent. If the axis drifted while teams advanced through the sandstone, the mistake could not be corrected without widening chambers, shifting doorways, or visibly distorting the plan. Yet the sequence of rooms remains coherent, and the final sanctuary sits directly in the path of the solar beam. Ancient Egyptian surveyors possessed practical instruments capable of producing accurate alignments. Plumb lines established verticals, leveling devices could control horizontal surfaces, and stretched cords created straight reference lines. Solar shadows and observations of circumpolar stars could also provide directional information. These methods explain how precision was possible in principle, but no surviving document describes the exact survey used at Abu Simbel. The sequence of observations, the placement of external reference points, and the method used to preserve the axis while quarrying more than 60 meters into darkness remain unknown. The darkness itself created another difficulty. Once excavation moved beyond the entrance, workers could no longer sight the distant horizon from every section of the tunnel. They would have needed an internal chain of reference lines, repeatedly checked as the halls advanced. Oil lamps supplied light, but they did not reveal whether the excavation remained aligned with the original sunrise bearing. The builders may have used cords running along the central axis, marks on floors and ceilings, or temporary sighting points established before deeper chambers were cut. Archaeology has identified the results, but not a complete operational record of how those results were achieved. Even the illumination of Ptah remains open to interpretation. Modern accounts often claim that the god was intentionally left dark because of his association with darkness or the underworld. The pattern is visually convincing, yet the sanctuary is not a modern spotlight installation in which one statue is perfectly isolated from every reflected ray. The light changes in width, intensity, and position as the sun rises, while the stone surfaces scatter part of it through the chamber. The stronger conclusion is that the direct beam favors three figures and leaves Ptah far less illuminated. Whether that contrast was calculated as a precise theological statement or emerged from the geometry of the sanctuary cannot be demonstrated with certainty. The identity of the two selected dates is equally uncertain. They are frequently described as the birthday and coronation day of Ramesses II, but no surviving inscription at Abu Simbel confirms either explanation. The king's exact birthday is not securely known, and converting an ancient Egyptian regnal date into the modern calendar is complicated by changes in calendrical systems. The dates could instead have been connected with a ritual cycle, the renewal of royal power, seasonal conditions in Nubia, or a festival that has left no clear textual record. Their distance from the equinoxes and solstices makes the alignment especially intriguing. A solstitial temple can be oriented toward an extreme point reached by the sun each year, a position that can be observed repeatedly as the sunrise stops moving northward or southward before reversing. Abu Simbel appears to target an intermediate solar position, reached once while the sunrise moves north and again while it returns south. Selecting that position required a calendar or a sustained observational program capable of recognizing when the sun occupied the same declination on opposite sides of the year. The temple also had to account for the real landscape, rather than an abstract astronomical horizon. Sunrise direction depends not only on latitude and season, but also on the elevation of the distant terrain. Hills can delay the first appearance of the solar disk, and alter the angle at which light reaches an entrance. The original architects therefore needed measurements specific to this exact location beside the Nile in Nubia. A plan copied from another temple would not automatically reproduce the same event. More than 3,000 years later, the precision was tested by one of the most complex archaeological rescue operations ever attempted. Construction of the Aswan High Dam threatened to submerge Abu Simbel beneath the rising waters of Lake Nasser. Between 1964 and 1968, an international campaign dismantled the temples, divided the rock into hundreds of blocks, transported them to higher ground, and reconstructed them beneath artificial hills. The new site was approximately 65 meters higher and several hundred meters inland from the original position. Engineers were not merely rebuilding carved rooms, they were recreating a solar instrument. The Great Temple was reassembled from more than 800 major blocks, while modern survey equipment controlled the orientation with tolerances measured in millimeters. Before dismantling was completed, Specialists recorded the original geometry and observed the February and October illumination. Reports from the operation noted that the sanctuary stood approximately 63.1 meters inside, and that the direct sunlight reached Ramesses II, Amun, and Ra-Horakhti, while Ptah remained outside the principal beam. The reconstructed temple still receives the sunrise, although claims that relocation shifted the phenomenon by exactly 1 day are often repeated more confidently than the evidence allows. The apparent date can vary according to atmospheric refraction, cloud, the definition of first illumination, and the calendar year. What is certain is more remarkable. 20th century engineers required detailed surveys, heavy lifting machinery, reinforced concrete domes, and an international budget to preserve a relationship between stone and sunlight, first established by surveyors working more than 3 millennia earlier. The modern rescue also reveals how narrow the original margins may have been. Reconstructing the temple required the orientation of the chambers, the relative elevations of the floors and sanctuary, and the geometry of the artificial mountain to remain close to the ancient arrangement. The event survived because engineers treated the axis as a critical scientific measurement rather than a decorative feature. Their success confirms that the illumination is produced by the architecture itself, not by coincidence or a modern myth created around an ordinary east-facing temple. Polygonal walls of Alatri, Lazio, Italy. Thousands of tons of limestone were assembled here with such astonishing precision that many joints remain almost impossible to slide even a thin blade between. Yet no one can say with certainty who built them. The ancient Acropolis of Alatri sits on a limestone hill about 80 kilometers southeast of Rome. But despite standing in one of Italy's most thoroughly studied regions, its greatest secret remained hidden in plain sight for centuries, because the massive walls were simply accepted as part of the medieval town built above them. Only during systematic archaeological and architectural studies in the 19th and 20th centuries did scholars begin documenting the extraordinary geometry of the fortifications and realize they represented one of the finest surviving examples of polygonal masonry anywhere in the Mediterranean. Detailed surveys revealed walls extending for more than 2 kilometers around the ancient settlement, while the Acropolis itself is enclosed by defensive walls reaching nearly 15 meters in height, constructed from enormous limestone blocks weighing from several tons to well over 30 tons without the use of mortar. What immediately separates Alatri from ordinary ancient fortifications is the astonishing accuracy with which every stone was shaped before it was lifted into place. Unlike Roman builders, who generally preferred rectangular blocks arranged in regular horizontal courses, the builders here created irregular polygons with 5, 6, 7, or even more precisely cut faces. Every surface was individually carved so that it matched the neighboring stones almost perfectly, creating joints so tight that even after more than 2,000 years of earthquakes, erosion, and seasonal expansion, many seams remain remarkably narrow. Modern stonemasons understand that producing one such joint requires repeated measurement and adjustment, yet Alatri contains thousands of them. The remarkable achievement is not merely transporting heavy stones, but shaping every contact surface so accurately that the entire structure behaves almost like a single continuous mass. That precision becomes even more extraordinary because nobody can confidently identify the people responsible for building it. This remains the central mystery surrounding Alatri and one of the longest-running debates in Italian archaeology. The traditional explanation attributes the walls to Roman engineers during the 4th century BCE, when Rome expanded across central Italy, yet this theory immediately encounters serious problems. Roman military architecture from the same period overwhelmingly relied on squared blocks, known as opus quadratum, or later on concrete construction, while polygonal masonry of this complexity appears only rarely in unquestionably Roman projects. If Roman builders possessed this remarkable technique, historians still struggle to explain why they almost completely abandoned it elsewhere, despite its extraordinary durability. Another interpretation credits the Hernici, the Italic people who occupied this region before Roman conquest. Ancient writers confirm their presence around Alatri, making the idea geographically plausible, yet no surviving written source describes the Hernici possessing engineering methods capable of producing masonry on this scale or with such exceptional geometric precision. Archaeology has uncovered settlements, pottery, and everyday artifacts associated with the Hernici, but nothing comparable to the technical sophistication demonstrated by the Acropolis walls. The sudden appearance of such advanced stoneworking, without a visible developmental sequence leading toward it, leaves researchers facing an uncomfortable gap in the archaeological record. Because neither explanation fully resolves the evidence, a minority of researchers has proposed that at least portions of the walls may predate both Roman and Hernici occupation, representing the work of an even earlier culture whose identity has disappeared from history. This hypothesis remains controversial because no direct archaeological evidence confirms such an early date, yet neither has any excavation produced decisive proof identifying the builders beyond doubt. Radiocarbon dating cannot be applied directly to bare stone, while later occupations reused and modified sections of the Acropolis, complicating attempts to establish a definitive construction sequence. More than a century of investigation has therefore produced increasingly detailed measurements without answering the simplest question of all: who actually designed and built this astonishing monument? As researchers continued examining the walls, they discovered that the precision extended far beyond the joints between individual stones. The Acropolis itself occupies an irregular hilltop, yet its perimeter follows carefully calculated lines that maximize stability while adapting to the natural bedrock beneath. Instead of forcing the terrain into a simple geometric plan, the builders integrated each massive block into the contours of the hill, allowing gravity to distribute enormous loads directly into solid limestone. Engineers studying dry stone construction often point out that structures relying entirely on compression demand exceptional accuracy because every contact surface influences how weight travels through the entire wall. A small error repeated thousands of times would gradually weaken the structure, yet Alatri has remained standing through centuries of seismic activity in central Italy, where destructive earthquakes have repeatedly damaged younger buildings. One of the most striking examples of this engineering appears at Porta Maggiore, the principal entrance into the Acropolis. The gateway is crowned by an immense monolithic lintel weighing many tons, positioned several meters above the ground with extraordinary accuracy. There are no surviving lifting holes that clearly reveal how the stone was raised, nor is there archaeological evidence identifying the machinery used during construction. Moving such a block horizontally would already have required careful planning, but placing it precisely above two supporting walls, while maintaining perfect structural balance, presents an entirely different engineering challenge. Even today, transporting and positioning a stone of comparable weight requires cranes, steel cables, and detailed calculations, making it difficult to reconstruct how ancient builders accomplished the same task using only the technologies available in antiquity. The walls also reveal an advanced understanding of mechanical stability that becomes increasingly apparent under close examination. Every polygonal block locks into several neighboring stones simultaneously, rather than simply resting upon the course beneath it. Instead of creating continuous vertical joints that could become structural weaknesses, the builders distributed contact surfaces in multiple directions, effectively tying the entire wall together as an interlocking system. Modern structural engineers recognize that such arrangements improve resistance against shifting loads because forces are dispersed across numerous contact points rather than concentrated along straight fractures. Whether the builders understood these principles mathematically or developed them through generations of practical experience remains impossible to determine, but the finished result demonstrates a sophisticated command of stone construction rarely equaled in the ancient world. The remarkable durability of the Acropolis continues to fuel debate because central Italy has experienced repeated earthquakes throughout recorded history. Numerous Roman temples, medieval towers, and later masonry structures have suffered partial collapse, reconstruction, or complete destruction during these events. The polygonal walls of Alatri, however, have survived with much of their original fabric still intact. Their resistance does not necessarily imply mysterious lost technology, yet it strongly suggests that the builders mastered construction techniques capable of absorbing movement without catastrophic failure. Since no mortar binds the stones together, slight adjustments can occur within the interlocking system, while the immense weight of each block maintains overall stability. Ironically, what appears at first glance to be primitive dry stone construction may actually explain the structure's exceptional resilience. Adding to the mystery, the walls contain almost no inscriptions identifying either their builders or their patrons. Unlike Roman monuments, which often record emperors, officials, or military victories, Alatri remains almost completely silent. Apart from 3 enigmatic symbols carved above Porta Minore, whose meaning is still debated, no written record explains who built the walls or why such extraordinary precision and effort were devoted to their construction. Southern Jordan's sandstone valleys, just a few kilometers from Petra, hide the ancient settlement of Bida, a place that looks insignificant at first glance. But buried beneath its collapsed stone walls is evidence that humans more than 9,000 years ago may have mastered technologies historians once believed were impossible for the Stone Age. Bida was first excavated in the 1950s by British archaeologist Diana Kirkbride. What began as a routine Neolithic excavation quickly became one of the strangest archaeological discoveries in the Middle East. Beneath layers of debris, researchers uncovered organized architecture, advanced plaster technology, food storage systems, and signs of environmental engineering that seemed thousands of years ahead of their time. But the most controversial mystery at Bida involves plaster technology. Microscopic analysis of floors and wall coatings revealed that the inhabitants produced lime plaster by heating limestone to temperatures between 700 and 900 degrees Celsius. For comparison, ordinary campfires rarely exceed 500 or 600 degrees Celsius consistently. Reaching temperatures above 800 degrees requires controlled airflow, fuel management, and insulated firing conditions. In other words, the people of Bida may have developed a primitive form of high-temperature industrial processing nearly 9,000 years ago. This discovery shocked archaeologists because the production process is incredibly demanding. Limestone must first be heated long enough to chemically transform into quicklime through calcination. The material is then mixed with water, causing an intense exothermic reaction that creates workable plaster. Modern experiments attempting to recreate Bida-style plaster have shown that maintaining these temperatures with primitive tools is extremely difficult. Some researchers believe the inhabitants may have constructed semi-enclosed kilns capable of concentrating heat using controlled ventilation systems. The scale of plaster use makes the mystery even deeper. This was not an occasional decorative material. Entire floors, walls, and internal surfaces across the settlement were coated in smooth white plaster. Producing just 1 square meter of lime plaster could require burning several times the weight of the final product in wood fuel. Some estimates suggest large-scale plaster production at Bida would have consumed enormous quantities of timber in an already semi-arid environment. Yet the settlement sustained this technology for generations. The first mystery appeared in the settlement's architecture. Early structures at Beda were circular, typical of many hunter-gatherer communities. But over time, the entire settlement shifted toward rectangular buildings, with sharply defined corners and carefully aligned walls. This transition may sound simple today, but archaeologists consider it one of the most important cognitive leaps in human engineering history. Circular huts are naturally stable and easy to build. Rectangular buildings require an understanding of load distribution, corner reinforcement, and spatial planning. Some walls at Beda were constructed using layered stone foundations packed with compacted mud, suggesting the builders understood how to stabilize structures on uneven terrain. What makes this more mysterious is the speed of the transition. In many regions of the ancient world, circular architecture remained dominant for centuries. Yet at Beda, rectangular planning became widespread remarkably early, around the 8th millennium BCE. Researchers have compared this sudden architectural sophistication to later settlements such as Catalhoyuk, even though Beda predates many of them. Even more disturbing is the durability of the material itself. Some plaster surfaces at Beda survive for nearly 9,000 years while retaining remarkable cohesion. Similar mysteries appear at Jericho and later at Roman sites famous for durable concrete. Researchers discovered that ancient builders sometimes accidentally created chemical reactions similar to pozzolanic processes, where lime interacts with ash or silicate-rich materials to strengthen over time. If Beda's inhabitants independently discovered primitive versions of these reactions, it would push the origins of advanced material engineering thousands of years deeper into human history. Scientists also noticed something unusual about the settlement's thermal behavior. Thick plaster-coated floors may have acted as primitive heat regulators, absorbing warmth during the day and slowly releasing it at night. In the cold desert climate of southern Jordan, this could have dramatically improved indoor survival conditions. Some archaeologists argue that Beda's architecture was not simply shelter, but an early attempt at environmental control engineering. Another mystery lies in Beda's storage systems. The settlement emerged during the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture, yet its food storage facilities appear surprisingly advanced. Excavations uncovered sealed storage pits lined with protective materials capable of reducing moisture infiltration. In an environment where humidity fluctuations and pests could destroy harvested grain, these systems may have allowed long-term food preservation on a scale uncommon for such an early community. This technological leap may explain how Beda supported a relatively stable population centuries before the rise of true cities. Reliable grain storage changes everything in human society. It allows labor specialization, planning, construction projects, and population growth. In many ways, the hidden engineering behind food preservation may have been just as revolutionary as agriculture itself. Researchers also found evidence of highly standardized stone tool production. Flint blades discovered at Beda often display nearly identical dimensions and shaping patterns. This level of uniformity is unusual for small Neolithic settlements, where tools were typically handmade individually. Some archaeologists believe specialized craftsmen may have used measurement references or standardized production techniques. The comparison becomes even more striking when placed beside sites like Göbekli Tepe. While Göbekli Tepe demonstrates monumental symbolic construction, Beda reveals something equally important: practical engineering sophistication embedded into everyday life. One site built massive ritual pillars, the other may have pioneered early industrial-scale material production and environmental adaptation. Water management presents another unsolved puzzle. Beda existed in a dry environment vulnerable to seasonal instability. Yet archaeological evidence suggests the settlement survived for centuries. Surveys around the site identified possible channels and runoff collection systems designed to capture seasonal water flow from nearby slopes. If these interpretations are correct, the inhabitants were practicing primitive hydrological engineering long before the irrigation systems of Mesopotamia became famous. Some researchers suspect the settlement's layout itself was planned around water efficiency and airflow control. Buildings were positioned in clustered arrangements that may have reduced wind exposure and heat loss. Certain open spaces could have functioned as communal work zones, while simultaneously improving ventilation between structures. Perhaps the most haunting mystery is why Beda disappeared. Archaeologists found no evidence of massive warfare or catastrophic destruction. Instead, the settlement appears to have declined gradually before being abandoned entirely. One theory suggests climate instability reduced vegetation and fuel supplies necessary for plaster production. Another proposes that the very technologies that made Beda successful eventually damaged the local ecosystem. Large-scale lime plaster manufacturing would have required tremendous amounts of wood, potentially accelerating deforestation around the settlement. If true, Beda may represent one of humanity's earliest examples of technological overreach, a civilization experimenting with industrial-scale production thousands of years before written history, only to face environmental collapse from the consequences of its own innovation. Do you think the people of Beda were simply far more advanced than we imagine? Or could ancient human technology have been lost and forgotten over time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the remote village region of Jharkhand, eastern India, Maluti temples should not still exist. More than 100 terracotta temples were built here centuries ago, using baked clay, organic binders, and fragile earthen materials in one of the harshest monsoon climates in South Asia. Yet many structures remain standing after hundreds of years of seasonal flooding. Humidity swings above 80%, biological erosion, and constant thermal expansion. Some walls still preserve microscopic carvings sharper than modern cement restorations. Even stranger, parts of the original surface coatings repel moisture more effectively than many modern conservation materials. Archaeologists call Maluti one of eastern India's greatest forgotten temple complexes. Engineers quietly see something more disturbing, evidence of construction knowledge that was never fully documented, then seemingly disappeared. The temples were largely documented during colonial-era surveys in the 19th century, although local communities had protected the site for generations before formal archaeological attention arrived. Early British surveyors described over 108 temples scattered across the settlement, though today only around 70 survive in partial form. What immediately confused researchers was scale. Maluti was not a major imperial capital like Vijayanagara or a wealthy ceremonial centre like Khajuraho. It was a relatively isolated settlement, yet the density of sacred architecture rivaled some far larger historical regions. Even more puzzling was the consistency of engineering across multiple structures built over different reigns. Most historians connect the construction of the temples to the Barbasanta dynasty between the 17th and 19th centuries. According to regional accounts, local rulers invested heavily in temple construction after receiving tax privileges from the Bengal Sultanate. But the historical explanation creates a technological contradiction. Building dozens of tall terracotta temples required enormous quantities of processed clay, controlled kiln temperatures, transport systems, and specialized artisans. Producing enough high-density fired brick for over 100 temples would likely have required millions of individual units. Even with conservative estimates, historians believe some temple clusters may have consumed more material than medium-sized fortified settlements of the same era. This becomes more mysterious when researchers examine the bricks themselves. Typical historical terracotta in humid regions suffers rapid exfoliation. Water enters microscopic pores, expands during thermal cycling, and gradually fractures the material from within. In Bengal and eastern India, many exposed clay structures deteriorate severely within a few centuries without constant maintenance. Yet several Maluti temples still preserve sharp geometric edges and relief surfaces despite centuries of monsoon exposure. Laboratory examinations on comparable Eastern Indian terracotta show compressive strengths ranging between 15 and 25 megapascals depending on firing quality. Some Maluti samples appear unusually vitrified, suggesting firing temperatures may have exceeded expectations for rural kilns of the period. No one fully understands how these firing conditions were achieved consistently. Archaeologists have not discovered industrial-scale kiln infrastructure capable of supporting such mass production. This absence has triggered several theories. One possibility is that temporary high-efficiency kilns were built using local insulating clay mixtures that left little archaeological trace. Another theory suggests artisans developed highly optimized fuel-air systems capable of generating stable firing temperatures above 900 degrees Celsius using biomass fuels. Experimental reconstructions have shown that maintaining uniform kiln temperatures with pre-industrial technology is extraordinarily difficult. Slight oxygen variation can cause catastrophic cracking in detailed terracotta panels, yet many Maluti carvings survived intact. The carvings themselves represent another unresolved engineering puzzle. Temple walls contain dense narrative scenes from Hindu epics, animals, floral geometry, dances, and military processions compressed into extremely small terracotta surfaces. Some motifs measure only a few centimeters across, yet preserve sharp line separation and layered relief depth. Clay normally shrinks unpredictably during drying and firing, especially in humid climates. Modern ceramic engineers compensate for this using moisture controls and carefully standardized compositions. Maluti artisans somehow achieved near-repeatable precision centuries earlier. Researchers comparing Maluti carvings with those at Bishnupur noticed something unusual. The density of decorative detail at Maluti is disproportionately high relative to structural thickness. In simpler terms, the walls were heavily carved without dramatically weakening the load-bearing integrity of the structure. This suggests the builders understood stress distribution better than expected. Certain arches and vertical supports appear intentionally thickened at hidden compression points, while highly decorated regions were placed where structural load remained lower. It resembles primitive finite load optimization, long before formal structural mathematics existed in the region. Then there is the issue of survival. Several temples show slight inward wall inclinations that appear deliberate rather than accidental. Modern engineers recognize this principle in anti-collapse masonry design. Even a few degrees of geometric correction can redirect gravitational stress more efficiently toward the foundation. Similar techniques appear in Inca stonework, Egyptian pyramids, and some Himalayan monasteries. But Maluti's application is unusual because it was implemented in relatively fragile terracotta architecture rather than massive stone blocks. The greatest mystery, however, may be hidden in the surface itself. Many temple walls once carried red, dark brown, and black mineral coatings layered over the terracotta. Traces remain today in protected recesses. Conservation scientists studying surviving fragments noticed that original coated areas often resist fungal growth and moisture penetration better than modern restoration patches applied during 20th century repair work. This should not happen. Modern conservation chemistry includes synthetic polymers, water-resistant sealants, and industrial mineral stabilizers. Yet some ancient surfaces at Maluti outperform them naturally. Preliminary material studies suggest the coatings may contain iron oxides, plant-derived organic compounds, carbon-rich binders, and naturally occurring silicates. But no complete formula has been reconstructed. Researchers suspect the coating acted not merely as pigment but as a breathable hydrophobic barrier. That distinction matters enormously. Many modern sealants trap moisture inside masonry, accelerating internal decay. Maluti's ancient coating appears to have done the opposite, reducing water penetration while still allowing vapor exchange. This is an engineering problem modern conservation still struggles with. In heritage preservation, one of the hardest challenges is balancing waterproofing with breathability. Cement coatings often suffocate historical brick structures. Polymer films crack under thermal expansion. Silicone treatments degrade under ultraviolet radiation over decades. Yet some Maluti surfaces survived monsoon cycles for centuries with minimal delamination. Scientists comparing weathering rates observed that untreated restoration zones often deteriorated faster than adjacent original material. In some locations, lichen growth spreads aggressively over modern repairs while partially avoiding ancient coated sections. One theory proposes that artisans used organic oils combined with iron-rich minerals and ultrafine clay particles fired into the outer surface during late-stage heating. Another hypothesis suggests plant resins acted as microscopic water barriers. Experimental recreations using natural lac resin and ferric compounds have produced semi-hydrophobic coatings with surprising durability, though none fully match the surviving Maluti samples. The exact ratio, preparation temperature, and curing process remain unknown. There is also evidence the coating may have had thermal functions. Dark mineral layers absorb and release heat differently than raw clay. Some researchers speculate the surface treatment reduced expansion stress during rapid temperature shifts between intense sunlight and monsoon cooling. If true, the coating was not decorative alone. It was structural technology disguised as art. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout ancient engineering history. Roman marine concrete used volcanic ash chemistry modern scientists only fully understood recently. Damascus steel displayed nanostructures centuries before electron microscopy. Maya pigments survived tropical humidity through molecular stabilization mechanisms involving clay and organic dye bonding. Maluti may represent another forgotten branch of material science hidden inside religious architecture. Do you think the lost coating technology of Maluti was simply forgotten over time? Or was it part of much deeper engineering knowledge we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Far from the famous capitals of the ancient world, Kibera lies hidden among the mountains of southwestern Turkey, a city that should not have possessed the level of engineering buried beneath its ruins. Earthquake-resistant structures, advanced hydraulic systems, acoustic architecture with near-perfect sound transmission, and at the center of it all, a mosaic floor so durable that even after nearly 2,000 years of earthquakes, moisture and collapse, its colors remain almost untouched. Kibera was never supposed to rival Rome or Alexandria, yet many archaeologists now believe it contained technical knowledge far beyond what historians expected from a regional mountain city. The ruins of Kibera sit near the modern town of Golhisar in southwestern Turkey, at an elevation of nearly 1,000 meters above sea level. The city was originally founded by peoples from Anatolia before later falling under Hellenistic and Roman influence. Ancient records describe Kibera as a powerful regional center, known for horse breeding, ironworking, and military organization. But for centuries, much of the city disappeared beneath soil, vegetation, and earthquake debris. Modern excavations accelerated in the early 21st century, revealing massive public buildings, stadiums, baths, underground infrastructure, and one of the most mysterious mosaics ever discovered in Anatolia. One of the first puzzles archaeologists noticed was the city's unusual survival pattern against seismic destruction. Kibera lies close to active fault systems within Anatolia, one of the most earthquake-prone regions on Earth. Modern Turkey experiences thousands of measurable tremors every year, and destructive earthquakes have repeatedly devastated nearby cities throughout history. Yet, many structural elements in Kibera remained standing long after neighbouring settlements collapsed completely. Researchers discovered that several buildings contained forms of flexible masonry rarely associated with provincial Roman cities. Stone blocks were connected using precision-cut joints capable of slightly shifting during seismic movement rather than cracking instantly under pressure. Some columns appear to contain internal metal connectors functioning similarly to primitive reinforcement systems. The engineering resembles concepts seen in later Byzantine and even modern earthquake-resistant construction. Unlike rigid structures that fail catastrophically under lateral shaking, flexible systems distribute seismic energy across multiple joints. Modern structural engineers comparing Kibera's remains with standard Roman masonry noted that certain buildings display unusually advanced stress distribution characteristics. The city may have developed construction methods through generations of observing repeated earthquake damage and adapting accordingly. What makes this mysterious is that no surviving written technical manual describes such techniques in detail. The stadium and theatre of Kibera present another anomaly. The city possesses one of the best preserved ancient stadium complexes in Anatolia, capable of seating thousands of spectators. Yet what truly surprises researchers is the acoustic performance. Modern sound tests conducted within portions of the surviving structure demonstrated that voices spoken near the centre can still be heard clearly dozens of meters away without amplification. This level of sound transmission usually requires carefully calculated geometry, reflective surfaces, and precise curvature. Ancient Greek theatres such as Epidaurus are famous for extraordinary acoustics, but Kibera's stadium was not expected to perform at a comparable level because of its different structural layout. Researchers found that the angle of seating rows, spacing between stone surfaces, and mineral composition of the limestone may have unintentionally or deliberately enhanced sound resonance. Some acoustic specialists believe the stone itself plays a role. Certain dense mineral concentrations reflect mid-frequency human vocal ranges particularly efficiently. Whether the builders understood acoustic mathematics formally remains unknown, but the result suggests sophisticated empirical knowledge accumulated through experimentation. However, the greatest mystery inside Kibera is not hidden in its walls or stadiums. It lies beneath the floor of a ceremonial structure where archaeologists uncovered the famous Medusa mosaic. At first glance, it appears simply beautiful, a detailed depiction of Medusa surrounded by intricate geometric patterns crafted from thousands of tiny coloured stone pieces known as tesserae. But scientific analysis revealed something far more astonishing. The mosaic should not have survived in such condition. The Medusa mosaic dates back roughly 1800 years. During that time, the region experienced severe earthquakes, seasonal flooding, temperature fluctuations, and structural collapse. Under normal circumstances, mosaics fracture, separate, discolor, or warp after centuries of pressure and moisture infiltration. Many Roman mosaics discovered across the Mediterranean survive only in fragments, yet the Kibera Medusa remained remarkably intact, preserving sharp detail and vivid coloration almost unprecedented for its age. Archaeologists began investigating not only the artwork itself, but the engineering hidden underneath it. Beneath the visible tesserae lies a complex multi-layer foundation system. Roman mosaics commonly used layered foundations, but Kibira's version appears unusually sophisticated. The lower layers contain compacted stone, lime mortar, and finely distributed aggregate designed to absorb stress and distribute weight evenly across the surface. Instead of behaving like a rigid slab, the foundation functioned more like a semi-flexible platform capable of handling subtle ground movement. Laboratory analysis of mortar samples revealed highly durable mineral combinations, possibly including volcanic ash components similar to pozzolanic materials used in Roman marine concrete. Pozzolanic reactions create crystalline bonding structures that strengthen over time when exposed to moisture. Modern scientists studying ancient Roman concrete have discovered that some mixtures continue chemically evolving for centuries, allowing them to resist cracking better than many modern materials. Kibira's mosaic foundation may have relied on similar principles. The tesserae themselves present another technical puzzle. Many were cut with extraordinary precision despite their tiny size. Some measure only a few millimeters across, yet maintained consistent geometry and alignment across large curved patterns. This required not only skilled craftsmanship but advanced planning. Any slight deviation in angle or spacing would distort the image dramatically. Creating the Medusa face alone likely required tens of thousands of individually shaped pieces. Even more mysterious is the preservation of colour. Pigments in ancient mosaics often fade due to oxidation, mineral reactions, or water damage. Yet many colours within the Medusa mosaic remain unusually vivid. Researchers believe the mineral composition of the stones may have contributed to long-term stability. Certain naturally coloured stones resist ultraviolet degradation and chemical erosion far better than artificial pigments. However, transporting and selecting such materials would have required access to extensive trade networks and deep material knowledge. Some engineers comparing Kibira's mosaic system to modern flooring technology noted similarities with layered, anti-fracture foundations used today in seismic zones. Modern earthquake-resistant floors often incorporate flexible intermediate layers designed to dissipate movement before stress reaches the visible surface. Kibira appears to have achieved a primitive version of this concept nearly 2 millennia earlier. Another unexplained aspect of Kibira involves its hydraulic infrastructure. Building stable water systems in mountainous terrain is extremely difficult because pressure changes rapidly with elevation. Excavations revealed channels, pipes, reservoirs, and bath complexes indicating highly controlled water distribution. Some researchers suspect portions of the system operated using inverted siphon principles, where water under pressure travels downward and rises again across uneven terrain. Roman engineers understood basic hydraulic principles, but implementing them successfully required precise calculations. Excess pressure could rupture pipes instantly. The fact that Kibira maintained reliable water distribution at high elevation suggests technical competence far beyond what historians once assumed about regional Anatolian cities. Combined with the earthquake-resistant construction and advanced mosaic foundations, the evidence paints a picture of a settlement deeply invested in engineering experimentation. Do you think Kibira's engineers discovered construction knowledge far ahead of their time, or are we underestimating how advanced ancient civilizations really were? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Central Iraq hides a massive fortress of brick and stone rising alone from the desert. Known as Al-Uqaydir Fortress, The structure has survived for more than 1,200 years under extreme heat, violent sandstorms, and centuries of abandonment. Yet many engineers still cannot fully explain how an 8th century civilization created a fortress with advanced passive cooling, unusually durable construction materials, and a defensive design that resembles concepts used in much later military architecture. The site was first systematically documented by Western archaeologists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, although local communities had known of its existence for centuries. Built during the Abbasid Caliphate around 775 AD, the fortress covers roughly 175 by 169 meters, surrounded by enormous outer walls reinforced with semicircular towers. From above, its geometry appears strikingly calculated, almost mathematical in precision. But the deeper archaeologists studied the fortress, the stranger its engineering became. One of the first mysteries is the climate control system hidden inside the architecture itself. Iraq's desert temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius during summer, yet several chambers inside Al-Qaeda remain significantly cooler than the outside air. Unlike modern buildings, the fortress used no mechanical ventilation. Instead, its builders relied entirely on geometry, airflow, wall thickness, and thermal mass. The outer walls in some areas measure more than 2 meters thick. During the day, these walls absorb solar heat slowly, delaying the transfer of temperature into interior rooms. Narrow corridors reduce direct sunlight exposure, while open courtyards create pressure differences that naturally pull hot air upward and circulate cooler air below. Modern architects describe this as passive cooling engineering, a concept now widely used in sustainable eco-design. What makes the mystery deeper is how advanced the system appears for the 8th century. Similar cooling principles existed in Persian wind catchers and underground Yakshal ice structures, but Al-Qaeda integrated multiple environmental technologies into a heavily fortified military complex. Some researchers compare its thermal strategy to modern climate-responsive architecture found in experimental desert buildings today. Another unexplained feature is the fortress's massive system of arches and vaults. Hundreds of curved ceilings stretch through halls, chambers, and passageways, distributing enormous loads without relying heavily on timber support. Many of these vaults remain structurally stable after more than 12 centuries of earthquakes, erosion, and thermal expansion. Engineers studying ancient compression systems have noted that Al-Qaeda demonstrates an unusually sophisticated understanding of weight distribution. The arches channel forced downward into thick supporting walls, minimizing lateral collapse. In some corridors, the proportions between curvature and height remain so consistent that researchers have questioned how builders maintained such precision without modern instruments. The fortress also contains transitional architectural forms that appear centuries ahead of their time. Some vaulting techniques resemble designs later perfected in Islamic and even European medieval fortifications. Historians continue debating whether Al-Qaeda influenced later military architecture across the Middle East. But perhaps the greatest mystery of all lies in the fortress's bricks and mortar. More than 1,200 years after construction, many sections of Al-Qaeda still retain sharp edges despite exposure to extreme desert conditions. Wind erosion in Iraq can destroy exposed mud brick structures within decades, especially when combined with salt crystallization and drastic temperature fluctuations. Yet large portions of the fortress walls remain remarkably intact. This has led archaeologists to suspect that Abbasid engineers may have developed a highly specialized mortar formula, adapted specifically for desert survival. Analysis of surviving materials suggests the builders used fired bricks combined with dense, mineral-rich mortar, capable of resisting both heat stress and salt penetration. Some researchers believe the mixture may have included gypsum compounds, lime variations, and fine desert aggregates selected to reduce cracking. Others speculate that organic additives could have been used, similar to the secret ingredients found in Roman concrete or Persian Sarouj waterproof mortar. The comparison to Roman concrete is particularly important. Roman harbour concrete became famous because seawater triggered chemical reactions that strengthened the material over time. At Al-Qaeda, however, the environmental challenge was the opposite. Instead of resisting moisture, the fortress had to survive relentless dryness, ultraviolet exposure, thermal cycling, and abrasive sandstorms. In modern engineering, repeated heating and cooling causes expansion stress that slowly fractures masonry. Desert environments are especially destructive because daytime and nighttime temperatures can differ dramatically. Over centuries, these cycles should have severely weakened the fortress, yet many walls continue standing with surprising stability. Some preservation specialists argue that the bricks themselves may hold the key. Ancient Abbasid kilns could have achieved firing temperatures high enough to produce unusually dense ceramic structures with lower porosity. Reduced porosity limits water absorption and salt damage, dramatically increasing long-term durability. The exact manufacturing process, however, remains uncertain. No surviving Abbasid engineering manuals fully explain how materials at Al-Qaeda were standardized across such a massive construction project. The consistency is astonishing. Many bricks appear nearly identical in size and composition, suggesting an organized production system operating at industrial scale centuries before mechanized factories. This raises another mystery: logistics. Constructing Al-Qaeda in the middle of an arid landscape would have required enormous quantities of water, clay, fuel, food, and labor. Tens of thousands of bricks had to be manufactured, transported, and assembled with remarkable precision. Maintaining uniformity across the fortress suggests centralized planning on a scale rarely associated with early medieval desert construction. Historians estimate that the Abbasid Caliphate controlled one of the most advanced administrative systems of its era, but Al-Qaeda hints at a level of coordination that still surprises researchers today. The fortress's defensive layout is equally sophisticated. Its entrance forces intruders through angled passageways rather than direct lines. Military historians identify this as an early form of layered defense design. Attackers entering the complex would be slowed, exposed from multiple positions, and funneled into controlled zones. This strategy resembles defensive principles later used in medieval castles across Europe. Yet Al-Qaeda predates many of them by centuries. Its semicircular towers also reveal strategic planning. Rounded structures distribute impact forces more effectively than flat walls and reduce structural weakness at corners. Some researchers argue the fortress demonstrates an intuitive understanding of defensive geometry long before formal military engineering theories were written. Then there is the acoustic mystery. Certain halls inside the fortress produce unusually strong echoes and amplified sound transmission. Voices can travel through vaulted corridors in ways that feel almost engineered. Similar acoustic effects appear in ancient sites such as the Hypogeum of Malta and several Maya ceremonial complexes, where architecture manipulated sound for ritual or communication purposes. At Al-Qaeda, some archaeologists believe these acoustic properties may have helped guards communicate across large interior spaces without visual contact. Others think the effects were accidental consequences of vaulted construction. No consensus exists. Even the true purpose of the fortress remains debated. Although usually classified as a military structure, Al-Qaeda contains features more consistent with palatial or administrative architecture. The complex includes residential quarters, ceremonial spaces, courtyards, and a mosque. Some scholars argue it functioned as a royal retreat or political center rather than a pure fortress. Its isolated location only deepens the mystery. Why build such a technologically advanced structure in a remote desert environment? Was it intended to control trade routes, protect political elites, demonstrate Abbasid power through architecture itself? The answers remain incomplete. Northern Sudan, near the western bank of the Nile and roughly 100 kilometers north of the ancient Kushite capital of Napata, hides one of the strangest pyramid fields on Earth, Sedienga Pyramids. Unlike the gigantic monuments of Giza, these pyramids are small, crowded, and packed so tightly together that some are separated by less than 2 meters. More than 35 pyramids were discovered compressed into an area barely larger than a basketball court, creating one of the densest funerary landscapes ever identified by archaeologists. The site was first investigated systematically by French archaeological teams in the 20th century, but satellite surveys and later excavations revealed something unexpected. Beneath the shifting sands was not a single cemetery, but an evolving architectural system that had expanded for centuries with astonishing precision. What initially appeared to be ordinary Nubian tombs slowly became one of the most difficult engineering mysteries in ancient African archaeology. The civilization responsible was the Kingdom of Kush, one of the most powerful empires in northeastern Africa between roughly 800 BCE and 350 CE. For decades, historians underestimated Kushite engineering, often portraying it as a shadow of ancient Egypt. But Sedienga challenges that idea completely. The site demonstrates a level of spatial planning, material durability, and construction consistency that many researchers believe has not been fully explained even today. Unlike the pyramids at Giza, which relied on massive centralized labor forces and enormous limestone blocks, Sedienga operated under far harsher conditions. Temperatures in this region can exceed 45 degrees Celsius during the day before dropping dramatically at night. Wind erosion from the Sahara acts like continuous industrial sandblasting. Seasonal sand movement destabilizes foundations, and yet many of these pyramids survived for nearly 2,000 years. The first major mystery begins with the layout itself. Archaeologists discovered that the pyramid field expanded generation after generation without destroying earlier tomb systems below the surface. Ground-penetrating radar later revealed overlapping burial chambers extending beneath neighboring structures like an underground maze. In some cases, newer pyramids were built less than a meter away from older shafts descending several meters into unstable sediment. Modern engineers note that such construction would normally carry a serious risk of collapse. Digging too close to an older chamber could destabilize the surrounding soil and trigger chain failures across nearby structures. Yet catastrophic collapses appear surprisingly rare at Sedienga. This suggests the builders possessed an advanced practical understanding of subsurface load distribution and soil behavior, despite having no surviving mathematical manuals, no metal surveying instruments, and no architectural blueprints. The density of the site also creates another unresolved problem. Why build in such extreme compression at all? The surrounding desert offered enormous open space. Instead of spreading outward, the Kushites continued inserting new pyramids into already crowded zones with incredible geometric discipline. Researchers comparing the site to other ancient cemeteries noticed that the layout resembles efficient urban planning more than traditional funerary expansion. Some archaeologists even describe the arrangement as an ancient form of architectural compression, where sacred land was treated as a limited resource requiring precise optimization. The pyramid angles themselves remained remarkably consistent, despite centuries separating different construction phases. Many maintained slopes exceeding 40 degrees, requiring careful weight distribution to prevent structural failure in shifting sand environments. Maintaining such consistency over hundreds of years without modern measurement systems remains difficult to explain. But the greatest mystery at Sadainga involves something far less glamorous than geometry or monuments. It involves mud brick. Most of the pyramids were constructed using combinations of mud brick and sandstone. On paper, this should have been a disastrous engineering choice. Mud brick is highly vulnerable to moisture fluctuations, thermal expansion, erosion, and structural fatigue. In desert climates, rapid temperature swings create repeated cycles of contraction and expansion that slowly fracture the material from within. Modern mud brick settlements in similarly harsh regions often deteriorate within decades, if not constantly maintained. Yet many pyramid cores at Sadainga remained identifiable after nearly 2,000 years of exposure to extreme environmental stress. Researchers analysing surviving fragments found evidence that the Kushites may have engineered their bricks with unusually controlled clay compositions. Some samples contained exceptionally dense compaction layers, while others revealed traces of organic fibres that may have improved flexibility and crack resistance. The mystery is that no complete recipe survives. Scientists suspect plant materials, mineral additives, or even ash-based stabilizers could have been mixed into the mud. Certain plaster remnants also suggest the possibility of protective outer coatings resistant to abrasive sand erosion. The durability becomes even more shocking when compared with later civilizations. Some Roman mud brick structures in North Africa deteriorated faster, despite being built centuries afterward, using documented engineering techniques. At Sadainga, however, sections of pyramid cores survived under conditions modern conservationists describe as extremely hostile. Wind moving across the Sahara can carry quartz-rich sand particles, capable of grinding exposed surfaces over time like mechanical polishing equipment. Yet traces of surface plaster survived on several structures. Researchers still debate whether the Kushites discovered a local mineral formula that improved resistance against erosion, or whether repeated maintenance cycles were organized through highly efficient labor systems now lost to history. There is also evidence that certain bricks were fired or partially heat-treated beyond ordinary sun-dried methods. Microscopic studies identified unusual hardness in specific fragments, raising questions about whether builders accidentally or intentionally created stronger ceramic-like layers. Experimental archaeology attempted to recreate similar compositions using Nile sediments and local clays, but matching the same durability has proven inconsistent. Even today, scientists cannot fully explain why some Sadainga bricks resisted environmental destruction far better than expected. The deeper archaeologists excavated, the stranger the site became. Many pyramids belong not to kings, but to middle-ranking elites, priests, officials, and wealthy families. This suggests pyramid construction was not restricted to a tiny ruling class. Such widespread monument ownership implies a highly organized economic and labor network capable of producing standardized funerary architecture over generations. Quarrying stone, manufacturing bricks, transporting materials, excavating burial shafts, and aligning structures all required coordinated specialists. Yet the surrounding region lacks evidence of gigantic imperial infrastructure on the scale seen in Egypt. Some experts now believe the Kushites developed an early modular construction system. Similar chamber layouts, repeated masonry styles, and consistent geometric proportions suggest builders followed standardized architectural templates that could be reproduced efficiently across different tombs. In effect, Sadainga may represent one of the earliest known examples of semi-standardized monument production in human history. Instead of constructing a few gigantic monuments, The Kushites created an expandable architectural network capable of functioning across centuries. Another mystery lies in the artistic remains scattered throughout the site. Nearby stood a temple dedicated to Queen Tai, wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III of Egypt's 18th dynasty. Stone fragments discovered there reveal a fusion between Egyptian and Nubian artistic systems unlike almost anywhere else in ancient Africa. The carvings contain extremely fine incisions cut into fragile sandstone prone to cracking. Some lines remain visible despite centuries of erosion. Archaeologists still debate how artisans achieved such precision using bronze or early iron tools on inconsistent local stone. Even more unusual is the hybridization of styles. Egyptian symbolism was not merely copied, it was adapted. Structural elements appear modified for local environmental conditions, suggesting Kushite architects understood how to merge foreign architectural principles with regional engineering realities. Transporting the stone itself presents another unresolved problem. Large sandstone blocks had to be moved across unstable desert terrain in an environment with limited nearby timber resources. Traditional wooden roller systems would have been difficult to sustain at large scale. Some researchers suspect the Kushites relied on seasonal moisture, compacted sand pathways, sled systems, or coordinated human traction methods similar to those theorized for Egyptian construction. But no definitive evidence survives explaining how transport was managed so efficiently in one of the harshest landscapes in Africa. Taragar Fort. Taragar Fort rises more than 800 meters above sea level like a fortress carved directly into the mountain itself. Historians call it one of the oldest hill forts in India, but archaeologists and engineers are interested in something else entirely. Hidden inside the stone walls of Taragar are engineering systems that still do not make complete sense today. Massive water reservoirs on a barren mountain, defensive structures seemingly designed for artillery centuries before cannons became common in the region, and underground networks that may have used advanced airflow principles long before modern ventilation science existed. The fort is believed to have been established around the 8th century under the Chowan dynasty, though many sections visible today were expanded across multiple eras. Unlike many ancient cities discovered through satellite imagery or buried excavations, Taragar never completely vanished. It stood in plain sight for centuries above Amer. Yet despite being continuously known, many of its core engineering secrets remain unexplained because historians focused more on its military history than on the technical sophistication hidden inside the structure itself. What makes Taragar unusual begins with its location. Most ancient mountain fortresses used elevation as defense, but Taragar goes beyond simple height advantage. The entire fortress adapts itself to the terrain with almost unnatural efficiency. Instead of forcing geometric symmetry onto the landscape, the builders integrated walls directly into the contours of the mountain. Modern structural engineers studying hill forts have noted that this type of adaptive architecture distributes stress far better during earthquakes and erosion than rigid, symmetrical layouts. Some walls reach thicknesses estimated at more than 6 meters, built from enormous stone blocks transported up steep mountain slopes centuries before industrial lifting systems existed. This immediately creates the first major mystery: how were thousands of tons of stone moved onto such a steep elevation? Even modern transport vehicles struggle on parts of the mountain road today. Archaeologists believe large ramps, wooden rollers, animal labor, and pulley systems were used, but no definitive construction infrastructure has ever been found. Similar mysteries exist at sites like Machu Picchu and Masada, where builders somehow transported massive construction materials into extreme terrain with limited technology. but Taragar differs because its stonework had to survive intense desert heat, seasonal monsoon erosion, and centuries of warfare simultaneously. The greatest mystery of all, however, lies not in the walls, but in the water. Rajasthan is one of the driest regions in India. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius. Mountain fortresses without permanent rivers nearby typically fail during long sieges because water becomes impossible to sustain. Yet Taragar contained enormous reservoirs carved directly into the mountain itself. Some are deep enough to store vast quantities of rainwater, capable of supporting defenders for extended periods. Historians estimate certain reservoirs could collectively store millions of litres of water. The engineering precision behind these reservoirs is astonishing. Rainwater channels were cut into the stone with carefully calculated gradients, allowing water to flow naturally across multiple collection points without stagnation. Even slight miscalculations in angle would have caused overflow failure or sediment blockage over time. Modern hydrology studies show that gravity-fed systems require surprisingly accurate slope management to maintain stable, long-term flow. Some channels inside Taragar appear to maintain consistent gradients across uneven terrain, with a precision difficult to achieve even using basic modern surveying tools. What confuses researchers further is the waterproofing technology. Several reservoir interiors still contain traces of sealing compounds that remained effective after centuries of exposure. Laboratory analysis of ancient Indian hydraulic mortars from comparable medieval structures has revealed mixtures containing lime, volcanic ash substitutes, organic fibers, plant extracts, and mineral additives that chemically hardened over time. In some cases, these materials behaved similarly to Roman hydraulic concrete, which becomes stronger through mineral reactions with moisture. Engineers studying Roman harbour structures found certain ancient concretes formed crystalline bonds that modern Portland cement often lacks. Some researchers believe Taragar's waterproof coatings may have relied on comparable long-term mineral stabilization processes. The question becomes even stranger when considering the fort's altitude. Every litre of water had to be harvested, stored, preserved, and protected entirely through passive engineering. No mechanical pumps existed. No modern filtration existed. Yet the system sustained one of the region's most important military positions for centuries. Some historians now describe Taragar less as a fortress and more as a giant mountain-scale water harvesting machine disguised as military architecture. The fort also contains evidence of highly advanced environmental adaptation. Temperatures inside certain chambers remain noticeably cooler than the outside environment, even during peak summer heat. This may be connected to passive airflow systems integrated into underground passages and stone corridors. Ancient Persian wind towers used similar principles by manipulating pressure differences and convection currents to cool buildings naturally. Some researchers suspect Taragar employed related methods adapted for mountainous terrain. Underground tunnels beneath the fort remain another unresolved mystery. Local legends describe hidden escape routes stretching through this mountain for several kilometers. While some collapsed passages have been documented, the complete underground layout has never been fully mapped. More intriguing are reports of natural air circulation deep inside certain tunnels. Engineers examining ancient subterranean systems often find that some civilizations unintentionally discovered sophisticated ventilation principles through experimentation. In Taragar, however, airflow appears unusually effective in specific sections, leading some to believe the system may have been intentionally engineered. Acoustic behavior inside parts of the fort has also attracted attention. Narrow, curved corridors amplify footsteps and echoes dramatically. Similar acoustic manipulation existed in ancient Maya temples, where echoes mimicked sacred bird calls and in Greek theatres designed to project voices with extraordinary clarity. Some military historians speculate Taragar's tunnel acoustics may have functioned as an early warning mechanism, allowing guards to detect movement through sound amplification long before intruders became visible. Another major anomaly involves the defensive architecture itself. Many sections of Taragar feature thick sloped walls rather than tall vertical ones. This is significant because angled fortifications absorb impact energy far more effectively than straight walls. In Europe, widespread adoption of sloped artillery-resistant fortifications accelerated during the gunpowder era between the 15th and 17th centuries. Yet portions of Taragar appear to predate widespread cannon warfare in the region. Military engineers studying impact physics know that sloped surfaces reduce direct force concentration by dispersing energy across a broader area. This principle later became fundamental not only in fortress design, but also in modern armoured vehicles and ballistic engineering. The unsettling implication is that Taragar's builders may have discovered through practical experimentation that lower-angled fortifications survived heavy impacts better than traditional high walls centuries before formal artillery science emerged locally. The strategic positioning of the fort adds another layer to the mystery. Watchtowers were placed with overlapping visual fields covering enormous areas around Ajmer. Fire or smoke signals from elevated towers could potentially communicate across long distances through chains of hilltop positions. Similar optical communication systems existed in the Byzantine Empire and ancient China, where beacon towers transmitted warnings over hundreds of kilometers. Some historians believe Taragar may once have formed part of a much larger regional communication network now mostly forgotten. Perhaps the most disturbing mystery is why these technologies vanished. The same thing happened with Roman concrete, Damascus steel, and the earthquake-resistant stonework of ancient Peru, techniques far ahead of their time that were later lost for centuries. Taragar may belong to the same category of lost technology, where knowledge was passed orally among specialized builders before disappearing through war, political collapse, or social change. Do you think Taragar's engineering was simply the result of forgotten experimentation, or evidence of knowledge far ahead of its time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. More than 3,000 meters above sea level in the highlands of Apurímac, Peru, the ruins of Sondor rise across a mountain ridge, like the remains of a civilization that should not have possessed this level of engineering. Massive stone terraces cut directly into steep Andes slopes. Flattened ceremonial platforms stand balanced on unstable mountain terrain. Drainage systems still function after centuries of earthquakes and erosion. Almost no written records survive from the people who built it. Yet Sondor may preserve evidence that the Chanka civilization understood large-scale mountain engineering far better than historians once believed. The site was identified through archaeological surveys in the 20th century, although local communities had known of the ruins for generations. Excavations revealed ceremonial plazas, defensive structures, stair systems, canals, and a massive stepped ceremonial platform known as an usnu. Researchers quickly realized Sondor was not a random hill settlement. It had been carefully designed around the mountain itself, transforming dangerous terrain into an organized ceremonial and political center. What shocked archaeologists was not only the scale of the construction, but the precision achieved at an altitude where even modern engineering projects face severe logistical problems. The greatest mystery surrounding Sondor is the enormous mountain flattening system that still lacks a complete explanation. Much of the complex sits on steep volcanic slopes where natural construction would normally be impossible. Modern engineers understand that leveling terrain on mountains is one of the hardest forms of large-scale construction because gravity constantly destabilizes the ground beneath the structure. Landslides, water erosion, seismic movement, and uneven load distribution can destroy foundations over time. Yet the builders of Sondor somehow carved enormous ceremonial platforms directly into the mountainside while maintaining long-term structural stability. Some terraces at Sondor extend across sharply inclined terrain with surprisingly uniform horizontal alignment. To create these surfaces, ancient workers would have needed to remove thousands of tons of rock and soil without steel tools, explosives, or wheeled transport. Archaeologists estimate that even small-scale terracing projects in the Andes required massive organized labor forces. At Sondor, the complexity goes beyond agriculture. These were ceremonial and political platforms requiring exact geometric leveling. The problem becomes even more astonishing considering the elevation. At over 3,000 meters, oxygen levels drop significantly compared to sea level, reducing physical work efficiency. Modern physiological studies show that oxygen availability at these elevations can fall by roughly 30%, making heavy labor dramatically harder. What makes Sondor unusual compared to other Andes sites is the apparent understanding of slope stabilization. In modern mountain engineering, retaining walls must redirect pressure laterally to prevent collapse. Many structures at Sondor appear to follow similar principles. Stone retaining systems absorb mountain pressure while allowing water to escape through drainage gaps. This reduces hydrostatic buildup, one of the primary causes of wall failure in mountainous environments. Similar concepts exist in later Inca sites such as Machu Picchu, where underground drainage systems account for nearly 60% of the site's engineering infrastructure. But Sondor may predate some of the most famous Inca hydraulic solutions, raising uncomfortable questions about where this knowledge originally emerged. The Chanca civilization itself remains poorly understood. Most surviving information about them comes from Inca chronicles written after violent wars between the two cultures in the 15th century. According to those records, the Chanca were feared military rivals capable of threatening Cusco before the rise of Emperor Pachacuti. But Sondor suggests they were far more than warriors. The engineering complexity of the site points to organized architectural planning, labor administration, geological understanding, and possibly even mathematical surveying techniques. One of the strangest aspects of Sondor is how precisely its structures interact with the natural topography. Instead of forcing straight-line geometry onto the landscape, many walls adapt organically to the mountain's contours. This reduces stress concentrations during earthquakes. Modern earthquake engineering often relies on distributing force across irregular structures rather than rigid, symmetrical systems. Some researchers believe ancient Andes builders discovered similar principles through centuries of experimentation in one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. Peru experiences thousands of detectable earthquakes every year due to tectonic interaction between the Nazca Plate and South American Plate. Yet portions of Sondor remain standing after centuries of seismic activity. The stonework itself creates another unanswered puzzle. While not as refined as the famous polygonal masonry of Cusco, many blocks at Sondor were still shaped with remarkable precision. The stones interlock closely enough to reduce instability without requiring mortar. Historians still debate exactly how ancient Andes civilizations achieved this level of shaping. Experimental archaeology has shown that hammerstones and abrasion techniques can produce smooth surfaces, but reproducing large-scale precision fitting remains extremely time-consuming, even under controlled conditions. At Sondor, Workers performed this process while transporting materials across steep mountain terrain with no draft animals capable of carrying massive stone loads. Water management may be the clearest sign of advanced engineering at the site. Mountain environments create violent seasonal runoff capable of destroying foundations within decades. Yet Sondor includes channels and runoff systems specifically designed to redirect rainwater away from ceremonial sectors. Some drainage paths appear integrated directly into terrace architecture. Modern civil engineers recognize that improper water management causes more structural failures in mountain settlements than earthquakes themselves. Without drainage control, soil saturation weakens foundations and triggers slope collapse. The survival of Sondor suggests its builders deeply understood how water behaves under mountain pressure. At the center of the complex stands the giant Usnu platform, perhaps the most mysterious structure in the entire site. Elevated above surrounding sectors, it dominates the ridge with a commanding panoramic view across valleys and distant peaks. Similar Usnu structures throughout the Andes are associated with ritual ceremonies, political authority, and astronomical observation. At Sondor, some researchers suspect the platform may have been aligned with solar events or seasonal cycles tied to agriculture and religious ceremonies. Certain stairways and sightlines appear oriented towards specific mountain horizons where the sun rises during important points of the year. While evidence remains inconclusive, the possibility connects Sondor to a broader Andes tradition of integrating astronomy directly into architecture. Comparisons with other ancient civilizations make the mystery even deeper. Across the ancient world, societies that mastered mountain engineering often possessed centralized bureaucracies and advanced logistical systems. The Romans used concrete and complex surveying instruments to stabilize mountain roads and aqueducts. The Nabateans at Petra carved hydraulic systems into desert cliffs using sophisticated water calculations. The Inca developed road systems stretching over 40,000 kilometers across impossible terrain. But the Chanca left behind little written evidence, explaining how they organized projects like Sondor. That absence creates one of archaeology's most frustrating gaps. The engineering survived. The explanations did not. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that Sondor represents only a fragment of a much larger lost technological tradition in the Andes. Many historians once treated pre-Inca civilizations as culturally fragmented societies lacking unified engineering sophistication. But discoveries across Peru continue to challenge that assumption. Advanced terracing hydraulic systems, seismic-resistant masonry, and astronomical architecture appear repeatedly across different cultures separated by centuries. This suggests knowledge was transmitted, refined, and inherited long before the Inca Empire emerged. What do you think the builders of Sondor truly understood about mountain engineering that history has forgotten? Share your theory in the comments below. Carved into a vertical limestone cliff in northeastern Bulgaria, less than 50 kilometers from the modern city of Shumen, a gigantic figure emerges more than 20 meters above the ground. A rider on horseback charges forward, a lion collapses beneath the horse, and a hunting dog follows behind. Known today as Madara Rider, the monument is one of the strangest surviving engineering mysteries from the early medieval world. Unlike most ancient carvings found inside temples or protected tombs, this relief was cut directly into an exposed rock face overlooking the Balkan plains. More than 1,200 years later, it still survives in conditions that should have destroyed it centuries ago. The site was formally documented by European scholars during the 19th century, although local populations had known about it for generations. Archaeologists quickly realized the carving was unlike anything else in Europe from the same period. The relief measures roughly 23 meters above the base of the cliff, while the carved scene itself stretches several meters across the rock surface. Researchers believe it dates to around the early 8th century during the rise of the First Bulgarian Empire, yet many details surrounding its construction remain unresolved. The first mystery begins with the location itself. The carving sits on a steep limestone wall that becomes dangerously unstable during seasonal weather changes. Modern climbing teams studying the monument reported that even with steel anchors and contemporary equipment, maintaining stable working conditions on the cliff is difficult because of wind pressure and loose sediment layers. Creating a monument at that height during the 8th century would have required a massive scaffolding system, but archaeologists have found very little evidence of anchor holes or structural supports large enough to explain how workers operated safely on the vertical surface. This becomes even more puzzling when examining the precision of the carving. The Madeira rider was not created using shallow surface engraving. The sculptors cut deeply into the rock, producing smooth contours and carefully controlled depth variations across the entire composition. Laser scanning surveys conducted in the 20th and 21st centuries revealed unusually consistent carving angles, despite the irregular limestone surface beneath. In several areas, the grooves maintain depth variations within only a few centimeters over long sections of stone. For comparison, many Roman reliefs carved on accessible temple walls show greater irregularity, despite being created under easier conditions. Researchers comparing the monument to Persian Sassanid cliff reliefs such as Nakshi Rostam notice similarities in composition and carving strategy. However, the Bulgarian monument differs in one critical aspect. The limestone at Madeira is significantly softer and more vulnerable to fracture than the rock used in Persian imperial carvings. Soft limestone tends to chip unpredictably during deep carving, especially under temperature fluctuations. Yet the Madeira rider preserved smooth transitions between figures and background without major structural collapse. One theory proposes that ancient workers may have used progressive grid mapping systems similar to methods later documented in Renaissance stone enlargement techniques. Under this hypothesis, artisans first drew a scaled model, then transferred proportions onto the cliff using ropes, marked reference points, and measurement ratios. Some researchers even suggested primitive plumbline engineering systems could have been used to maintain symmetry while working from suspended wooden platforms, but no surviving tools or detailed construction traces have ever confirmed the method. The durability of the monument creates another major mystery. Bulgaria's climate subjects expose stone to freeze-thaw cycles, acid rain, strong winds, and summer heat extremes. Geological studies estimate that exposed limestone in the region typically loses measurable surface material every century through natural weathering. Yet the Madeira rider still preserves visible anatomical details, including the horse's legs and parts of the rider's clothing. Nearby cliff surfaces show heavier erosion than the carved relief itself, creating a contradiction that geologists still debate. Some specialists suspect the sculptors intentionally selected a section of limestone with unusually dense mineral composition. Microscopic studies identified areas containing higher silica concentrations than surrounding layers, potentially slowing erosion. However, this alone cannot fully explain why delicate carved edges survived so well for over a millennium in open-air exposure. Another controversial theory suggests the relief may once have been coated with an organic protective treatment, perhaps involving oils, resins, or mineral compounds similar to preservation mixtures used in parts of the ancient Mediterranean world. If such a coating existed, almost all traces have vanished. Adding to the confusion are the Greek inscriptions surrounding the monument. Several inscriptions reference Bulgarian rulers including Tervel and Omertag, confirming the site's political importance during the First Bulgarian Empire. But the inscriptions appear stylistically different from the main carving. Some epigraphers argue the text was added later, onto an already existing monument. This has fueled speculation that the relief itself could predate the Bulgarians entirely. A few historians proposed links to Thracian or even earlier nomadic steppe traditions. Horse rider imagery was common among steppe cultures across Eurasia, symbolizing royal authority, military dominance, and divine legitimacy. Yet no directly comparable cliff monument of this scale has been discovered from those societies. Others point toward Byzantine influence, though Byzantine imperial art rarely used monumental, outdoor cliff reliefs in such inaccessible locations. The scale of the Madara rider also raises strategic questions. Positioned high above surrounding terrain, the monument remains visible from considerable distances under strong sunlight. Military historians suggested it may have functioned as a form of psychological territorial marker along movement routes crossing northeastern Bulgaria. Ancient armies, traders, and diplomats traveling through the region would have seen the enormous mounted figure dominating the cliffs long before reaching nearby settlements. In that sense, the monument may have served as both political propaganda and symbolic border control. Modern digital analysis introduced even more mysteries. High-resolution three-dimensional scans revealed strange, unfinished cut patterns near sections of the horse and rider. Some grooves appear abandoned midway through carving, while others suggest the composition may originally have included additional figures or decorative elements now lost to erosion. This led to speculation that the project was interrupted, modified, or partially redesigned during construction. The monument is often compared to colossal rock carvings such as Abu Simbel, but there is a major difference. Egyptian monuments were carved into relatively stable sandstone formations and protected by dry desert climates. Madara exists in a far harsher environment with seasonal humidity and constant exposure. Engineers studying ancient stone preservation consider its survival statistically unusual compared to similar exposed reliefs across Europe. Even today, conservation teams struggle to prevent further deterioration. Moisture infiltration creates microfractures inside the limestone, while pollution accelerates chemical decay. Some restoration experts warned that parts of the relief could eventually collapse if stabilization systems fail. Ironically, modern technology still cannot fully explain how ancient builders created and preserved the monument with such success over 12 centuries ago. Do you think the builders of the Madara rider possessed engineering knowledge far beyond what historians currently believe? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Beneath the foothills of the Tian Shan Mountains in southeastern Kazakhstan, Issyk Kurgan concealed one of the strangest archaeological discoveries of the ancient steppe. Beneath an ordinary burial mound, archaeologists uncovered a warrior covered in thousands of gold fragments so advanced that, even today, parts of the technology behind them remain difficult to explain. The site was discovered in 1969 near Almaty during a Soviet excavation led by archaeologist Kamal Akishev. Most kurgans across Central Asia had already been looted centuries earlier, so expectations were low. But inside a partially untouched chamber, researchers found the remains of a young Seika noble, later called the Golden Man, buried with more than 4,000 gold ornaments, weapons, silver vessels, and mysterious inscriptions. The burial dated to roughly the 4th century BCE, yet many of its engineering details appeared unexpectedly sophisticated for a nomadic culture traditionally portrayed as technologically primitive. The first mystery emerged from the gold craftsmanship itself. The Saka were horse-riding nomads of the Eurasian steppe, not a centralized empire with massive urban workshops like the Achaemenid Empire. Yet the artifacts from Issyk display microscopic precision comparable to elite metalworking traditions from Persia, Scythia, and even some Mediterranean cultures. Thousands of tiny plaques shaped like snow leopards, mountain goats, birds, and deer were cut from thin sheets of gold with near-perfect symmetry. Some pieces are only a few millimeters wide, but their edges remain astonishingly sharp and consistent after more than 2 millennia. What confuses researchers is the production scale. Creating a single decorative plaque by hand would already require advanced hammering, annealing, engraving, and polishing techniques. Issyk contained thousands. Experimental archaeologists attempting to reproduce similar ornaments using Iron Age tools discovered that even with modern understanding of metallurgy, achieving that level of uniformity without precision templates is extraordinarily difficult. Several plaques appear almost standardized, suggesting either a highly organized production system or specialized workshops moving across the steppe trade networks. The engineering behind the famous pointed headdress adds another layer of mystery. Rising nearly 70 centimeters tall, the crown-like structure contains stacked animal symbols and golden branches arranged vertically with remarkable balance. Modern reconstructions revealed that if the object had been made from solid gold, it would have been far too heavy to wear in ceremonial movement. Instead, the builders likely used an ultralight internal framework combined with thin gold sheets. Some historians compare the concept to primitive composite engineering, reducing weight while preserving visual grandeur, something rarely associated with nomadic Iron Age societies. But the most debated mystery surrounding Issyk Kurgan is the extraordinary durability of the gold after 2,400 years underground. Kazakhstan experiences severe environmental fluctuations. Temperatures in the region can range from below 20 degrees C in winter to above 30 degrees Celsius during summer. Burial mounds across the Eurasian steppe are constantly exposed to freeze-thaw cycles, moisture infiltration, shifting soil pressure, and mineral contamination. Under such conditions, organic materials usually decay rapidly, and metal surfaces often corrode or discolor over centuries. Yet many of the Issyk gold ornaments emerged with minimal oxidation and unusually preserved surface detail. Gold itself is chemically resistant, but not completely immune to long-term environmental effects when mixed with impurities. Modern spectrographic analyses suggest that many Issyk artifacts contain exceptionally high gold purity, in some cases exceeding 90%. Achieving such refinement in the 5th century BCE raises difficult questions because the Saka left behind no known refining infrastructure comparable to the industrial-scale furnaces of Persia or later Roman metallurgy. Even more puzzling is the attachment system used on the garments. Thousands of miniature plaques were fixed onto leather and fabric in ways that still confuse conservation experts. In several areas, there are surprisingly few visible large rivets or heavy stitching marks. Some archaeologists suspect the use of organic adhesives, resin compounds, or pressure-fitting methods now lost to history. Others believe thin hidden fasteners may have been inserted beneath the garment layers using techniques requiring far greater material understanding than previously assumed for steppe cultures. Comparisons with other ancient civilizations only deepen the mystery. Gold recovered from certain Scythian tombs in Siberia often shows tarnishing, cracking, or deformation after long burial periods. Even some Egyptian gold ornaments, despite Egypt's dry climate, developed surface wear after thousands of years. Yet many Issyk pieces retained exceptional clarity and engraved patterns, especially in delicate animal-style decorations. This has led some researchers to speculate that the Saka may have intentionally alloyed trace elements into the gold to improve stability. though no consensus exists on what those additives may have been. Another unexplained aspect involves the burial environment itself. The chamber appears to have been constructed with unusual awareness of moisture control. Layers of soil, stone, and organic material were carefully compressed, potentially reducing water penetration into the inner tomb. Similar engineering principles appear in frozen Scythian kurgans of the Altai Mountains, where carefully layered burial structures created semi-stable microclimates capable of preserving organic remains for centuries. Some experts argue that Issyk represents a warmer climate variation of the same preservation logic. The famous silver bowl discovered beside the burial introduced yet another unresolved mystery. Inscribed along its inner surface are 26 symbols that still cannot be conclusively translated. The script does not fully correspond to Old Persian, Sogdian, or later Turkic alphabets. If the inscription truly represents a unique Saka writing system, it would dramatically change assumptions about literacy and administration among steppe nomads. Several linguists have attempted decipherments, but no interpretation has achieved broad acceptance. The precision of the engraving itself is equally strange. The symbols were carved with consistent spacing and depth using tools sharp enough to maintain clean lines across curved silver surfaces. Under magnification, some cuts appear unusually controlled for hand engraving techniques believed available in Central Asia during the Iron Age. This has fueled debate over whether specialized elite craftsmen traveled between distant kingdoms sharing advanced metallurgical knowledge. Trade connections may explain part of the puzzle. Issyk's animal-style art resembles motifs found across the wider Scythian culture world, stretching from the Black Sea to Siberia. Certain decorative elements also resemble Persian ceremonial art from the Achaemenid Empire. This suggests that Eurasian steppe cultures were far more interconnected than historians once believed. Instead of isolated tribes, they may have operated within a vast technological exchange network carrying metallurgical techniques, symbolic systems, and engineering knowledge across thousands of kilometers. Despite many theories, Issyk Kurgan still leaves one major mystery. How could nomadic tribes maintain such advanced craftsmanship across thousands of kilometers without permanent industrial centers? Some archaeologists believe traveling master craftsmen once moved with elite warrior clans, while others suggest hidden workshops existed near mining regions in the Altai Mountains. However, direct evidence remains extremely limited. Do you think the people behind Issyk Kurgan possessed a level of technology far beyond what history officially tells us? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. In the hills of northern Jordan, near the Yarmouk Valley, Abila of the Decapolis was once a thriving Roman frontier city. Today, beneath its collapsed columns and silent churches, archaeologists are uncovering evidence of engineering knowledge that should not have existed in a desert city nearly 2,000 years ago. The ruins of Abila were first systematically investigated during the 19th century, but major excavations accelerated in the 1980s when archaeologists began uncovering Byzantine churches, underground reservoirs, tunnels, and massive hydraulic systems hidden beneath layers of earthquake debris. What initially appeared to be another forgotten Roman settlement quickly turned into one of the strangest technological puzzles in the Decapolis world. One of the first mysteries involves water. Abila stood in a semi-arid region receiving roughly 300 to 500 millimeters of rainfall annually depending on climatic cycles, far too unstable to support a dense urban population without advanced water control. Yet excavations revealed a remarkably sophisticated hydraulic network carved directly into limestone bedrock. Stone channels carried water across long distances using gradients so precise that modern engineers comparing the system to Roman aqueduct standards found deviations of only a few millimeters per meter in certain surviving sections. That level of accuracy is difficult even with modern laser equipment. Ancient builders would have relied on primitive surveying tools, rope measurements, and gravity calculations. Yet the water in Arbela appears to have moved with carefully controlled flow pressure, minimizing erosion while maximizing storage efficiency. More mysterious is how the entire system was layered vertically. Reservoirs at different elevations allowed the city to redirect water naturally using gravity alone, essentially creating a passive pressure management system. Similar hydraulic logic appears in the Nabatean city of Petra, where engineers mastered flash flood harvesting in the desert. But Arbela's system seems optimized not only for survival, but for long-term urban stability during unpredictable drought cycles. Climate studies of the Eastern Mediterranean suggest the region experienced severe fluctuations between wetter and drier periods during late antiquity. Some researchers believe Arbela's survival through these environmental shifts may have depended entirely on this hidden infrastructure beneath the city. But water engineering is only the beginning. Underneath several Byzantine structures, archaeologists discovered tunnels and underground chambers whose purpose remains unclear. Some are narrow and functional, while others open into surprisingly large subterranean spaces. The deeper investigators explored, the stranger the temperature patterns became. Even during intense Jordanian summers, temperatures inside certain chambers remain dramatically cooler than the surface above. Measurements taken in comparable underground limestone environments across the Levant show temperature reductions of 8 to 12 degrees Celsius compared to outside air. This has led some researchers to suspect that Arbela may have used passive cooling technology centuries before modern climate engineering. The design resembles ancient Persian ventilation systems known as wind catchers, as well as subterranean cooling tunnels used in desert settlements across Iran. Yet Arbela combined these ideas with Roman urban planning. Air appears to have circulated through elevation differences and hidden ventilation paths, creating natural airflow without mechanical assistance. If correct, the city may have functioned with an early form of environmental architecture, a built system designed not just for shelter, but for thermal regulation itself. Then came the earthquakes. The Jordan Rift Valley is one of the most seismically active regions in the Middle East. Historical records describe devastating earthquakes in 363 and 749 CE that destroyed entire cities across the Levant. Many settlements vanished permanently after these events, yet parts of Arbela remained standing. Archaeologists examining fallen structures noticed something unusual about the masonry. Rather than rigidly locking stones together with excessive mortar, many foundations used tightly cut limestone blocks capable of slight movement during seismic activity. This flexibility may have absorbed vibrations instead of transferring destructive force directly into walls. The comparison that shocked many researchers was not Roman at all, but Incan. At Machu Picchu, Incan builders developed earthquake-resistant stonework by cutting massive blocks so precisely they could shift slightly without collapsing. Arbela's engineering appears to follow a surprisingly similar principle despite existing on another continent over 1,000 years earlier. No direct connection existed between these civilizations, yet both may have independently discovered that rigid structures fail during earthquakes while flexible stone systems survive. Still, the most haunting mystery at Arbela is not underground. It is color. Inside the remains of Byzantine churches, archaeologists uncovered mosaic floors whose pigments remained astonishingly vivid after more than 1,500 years. Reds, blues, blacks, and gold tones survived despite centuries of humidity changes, heat exposure, mineral contamination, earthquakes, and human destruction. Modern conservation teams were stunned by the chemical durability of the materials. Scientific analysis revealed that many pigments were created using mineral compounds with extraordinary resistance to oxidation. Some tesserae contained iron-rich compounds capable of maintaining colour stability over extremely long periods. Others appear to have incorporated rare trace minerals that reduced fading caused by ultraviolet radiation. Even more puzzling is the binding technology. The mortar beneath many mosaics still shows exceptional cohesion despite extreme age. In laboratory comparisons, some ancient lime-based compounds demonstrate compressive durability approaching lower-grade modern concrete after surviving over 1.5 millenniums underground. Microscopic analysis suggests ancient builders may have unintentionally engineered mineral reactions similar to those now studied in self-healing Roman concrete research. But unlike ordinary Roman floors, the mosaics of Abila endured repeated seismic disasters. In some churches, sections collapsed while adjacent mosaic panels survived almost intact. This suggests the underlying support layers may have been designed to distribute stress unevenly during structural failure. In other words, the floor itself may have acted as a shock-absorbing surface. Researchers still debate whether this was intentional or simply an accidental result of layered Byzantine construction methods. Either explanation is extraordinary. The colours themselves remain another unresolved mystery. Certain blue and green shades appear chemically stable far beyond what experts expected from local mineral sources. Some scholars suspect trade networks supplied pigments from Egypt or Anatolia. Others argue local artisans possessed advanced purification techniques now lost to history. What makes this mystery unsettling is that modern restoration attempts often fail to recreate the same long-term stability. Many modern pigments fade within decades. The mosaics of Abila survived 15 centuries. And the city keeps becoming stranger. Excavations reveal that many streets were not aligned in perfect Roman grids. Instead, sections subtly shifted orientation according to terrain and prevailing wind direction. Researchers studying airflow patterns suggest these angled streets may have reduced hot desert wind intensity while improving ventilation through residential districts. This resembles principles now used in modern climate-responsive urban design. The city also reflects a collision of civilizations. Greek influence appears in architecture. Roman engineering shaped infrastructure. Nabatean hydraulic knowledge likely influenced water systems. Byzantine Christianity transformed public spaces into religious complexes filled with symbolic art. Yet Abila does not simply imitate these cultures. It merges them. Some archaeologists now describe the city as a technological hybrid zone, a place where engineering traditions from multiple civilizations fused into systems uniquely adapted to harsh environmental conditions. Ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest much of the city still remains buried. Beneath visible ruins lie large rectangular structures, hidden chambers, and additional underground passages extending far beyond excavated areas, meaning the greatest secrets of Abila may still be underground. Do you think ancient civilizations knew far more about engineering and materials than modern history admits? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Mountainous terrain of southwestern Serbia near modern Novi Pazar hides the ruined fortress city of Stari Ras, still clinging to the cliffs like part of the mountain itself. Almost nothing about it looks extraordinary at first glance. There are no giant pyramids, no perfectly polished megaliths, no towering temples visible from space. Yet historians and archaeologists increasingly believe Stari Ras may contain one of the most underestimated engineering mysteries of medieval Europe. Built between the 9th and 13th centuries, this was the political heart of early medieval Serbia, positioned at the crossroads between the Byzantine Empire, the Slavic world, and the trade routes connecting the Adriatic coast to the Balkans. But the deeper researchers study the site, the harder it becomes to explain how builders working with supposedly limited medieval technology created fortress systems so perfectly adapted to extreme terrain that parts of it survived more than 700 years of erosion, earthquakes, warfare, and abandonment. The site was first systematically identified by modern researchers during 19th century expeditions through the Balkans, though local populations had known the ruins for centuries. Excavations accelerated during the 20th century, especially after Yugoslav archaeological teams began mapping the region in detail. What stunned researchers immediately was the location itself. Stari Ras was not built on flat ground like most medieval capitals. Instead, it was constructed across steep limestone ridges at elevations exceeding several hundred meters above surrounding valleys. Even modern engineers consider such terrain difficult for large masonry construction, because uneven stress distribution can gradually crack foundations apart. Yet many wall sections at Stari Ras remained structurally stable for centuries despite exposure to freeze-thaw cycles, seismic vibration, and warfare. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding the fortress is its terrain-integrated architecture. Unlike Roman forts, which often relied on extensive levelling and geometric planning, Stari Ras appears to have been designed to merge directly with the mountain. Archaeologists discovered that many walls were anchored directly into natural limestone formations using interlocking masonry techniques, rather than relying entirely on mortar. This dramatically reduced sliding forces on steep slopes. Modern structural comparisons show similar techniques were used in some Byzantine mountain fortresses and Armenian cliff citadels, but those sites were usually supported by far larger imperial economies. Stari Ras belonged to a regional medieval kingdom with far fewer resources, making the sophistication of the engineering difficult to explain. Some preserved wall sections show deviations of only a few centimeters, despite construction on irregular rock surfaces. That level of precision would have required careful understanding of weight transfer and load balancing. Engineers studying surviving sections noted that poorly calculated walls on slopes normally begin separating within decades due to gravity and seasonal expansion. Yet parts of Stari Ras endured for centuries. In some areas, builders even shaped stones to lock naturally against bedrock angles, reducing lateral stress without modern reinforcement systems. Similar principles are used today in earthquake-resistant retaining structures. Another unexplained feature involves the fortress access routes. Most medieval fortresses relied on visible defensive approaches, forcing attackers through gates or narrow choke points. But at Stari Ras, many pathways become nearly invisible from a distance because they blend into the surrounding rock formations. Researchers believe this was intentional. The roads were constructed in narrow zigzag patterns that prevented cavalry charges and slowed siege equipment. More importantly, the angles of these routes appear optimized for defensive visibility. Defenders positioned above could monitor almost the entire approach, while remaining hidden until the final moments before engagement. Military historians compared this arrangement to Byzantine defensive theory described in 10th century military manuals, where elevation and controlled visibility were considered more valuable than sheer wall height. However, the implementation at Stari Ras seems unusually advanced for a frontier Balkan stronghold. Some experts argue the fortress functioned less like a conventional city and more like a carefully engineered defensive machine built directly into the landscape itself. The water system may be the site's most technically mysterious element. Throughout medieval history, fortresses rarely fell because walls were breached. Most collapsed because defenders ran out of water. Yet archaeological surveys at Stari Ras uncovered cisterns carved directly into stone alongside channels designed to collect rainwater from surrounding slopes. What researchers still cannot fully explain is the waterproofing material lining several reservoirs. Chemical analysis revealed mineral compounds that remained bonded to stone surfaces despite centuries of moisture penetration and temperature fluctuation. Modern waterproof mortar deteriorates rapidly under repeated freeze-thaw expansion unless carefully engineered. Yet traces inside the Stari Ras reservoir survived conditions that destroyed much newer structures throughout the Balkans. Some researchers suspect builders mixed volcanic ash, lime and local mineral additives in proportions no longer documented. Similar long-lasting hydraulic mixtures existed in Roman marine concrete, which famously becomes stronger when exposed to seawater due to chemical reactions involving volcanic material. But no direct evidence confirms how medieval builders at Stari Ras achieved similar durability in a mountainous inland environment. There are also signs that the fortress may contain hidden underground structures still unexplored today. Ground-penetrating surveys detected hollow spaces beneath several ruined sections, but excavation remains incomplete due to the instability of the terrain. Some historians believe these chambers were food storage areas or escape tunnels. Others suggest they may have served a structural purpose. Certain cavities appear positioned beneath load-bearing areas, raising the possibility that medieval builders intentionally created pressure dispersal chambers to reduce cracking in unstable mountain rock. If true, that would indicate a surprisingly advanced understanding of geological stress. Comparable engineering concepts appear in later Renaissance military fortifications designed to absorb cannon shock waves, yet Stari Ras predates many of these systems by centuries. Even if the chambers were not intentionally engineered for stress control, their placement remains difficult to dismiss as coincidence. The fortress also reveals evidence of continuous adaptation across generations. Different construction layers show that Stari Ras evolved over centuries instead of being built in a single phase. Earlier sections used relatively narrow defensive walls typical of pre-gunpowder warfare, while later additions became significantly thicker. Some historians believe this reflects anticipation of increasingly powerful siege engines, such as counterweight trebuchets, which emerged in Europe during the 12th and 13th centuries and could launch projectiles weighing more than 100 kilograms over distances exceeding 200 meters. This suggests that the builders of Stari Ras were responding to changing military technologies faster than previously assumed for medieval Balkan states. Similar transitions occurred in Crusader castles and Byzantine frontier fortifications, but again, those systems belonged to far wealthier powers with access to larger engineering networks. Another mystery involves the sudden decline of the city itself. Historical records suggest Stari Ras lost importance relatively quickly after Ottoman expansion reshaped regional trade and political control. But archaeological evidence indicates some sections were abandoned before major destruction occurred. Certain structures appear left behind with surprisingly little evidence of catastrophic siege damage. This has led some historians to speculate that the fortress was not merely military infrastructure, but also a symbolic political and religious centre, whose strategic purpose disappeared once regional power shifted elsewhere. Do you think the builders of Stari Ras possessed engineering knowledge far ahead of their time, or are modern historians still underestimating medieval civilizations? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In Egypt's western desert, more than 700 kilometers from Cairo, Dakhla Oasis should not exist. Surrounded by one of the driest environments on Earth, this isolated oasis somehow supported cities, agriculture, trade routes, and complex engineering for thousands of years. Yet the deeper archaeologists dig into Dakhla, the stranger it becomes. Beneath the sand are ancient water systems that still function. mud brick cities that survived longer than some stone structures, and architectural designs so efficient that modern climate engineers still study them today. The modern rediscovery of Dakhla accelerated during the 20th century through Egyptian expeditions, aerial surveys, and desert archaeology projects. Satellite imaging later revealed buried settlements, forgotten caravan routes, and underground water systems hidden beneath layers of drifting Sahara sand. What shocked researchers was not simply the size of the oasis network, but the level of technical adaptation achieved in an environment receiving less than 50 millimeters of rain annually. In some years, rainfall is effectively zero. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Dakhla is its mastery of underground water. The oasis depends on the Nubian sandstone aquifer system, one of the largest fossil water reserves on Earth, stretching beneath parts of Egypt, Libya, Chad, and Sudan. Today, hydrologists use satellite mapping, pressure analysis, and geological modelling to locate productive wells. Yet ancient engineers at Dakhla somehow positioned wells with extraordinary precision more than 2,000 years ago. Many of these wells tapped naturally pressurized groundwater that rose without mechanical pumping. Some still flow today. Researchers studying Roman-era hydraulic systems at Dakhla found carefully engineered gradients in underground channels designed to maintain stable water movement while minimizing erosion. In some sections, the slope deviation is astonishingly small, comparable to later Persian Qanat systems, considered among the greatest hydraulic achievements of the ancient world. The mystery is not just that the system worked, but how ancient builders understood subsurface hydrology with such accuracy in an era without modern geological instruments. But the most baffling mystery of Dakhla may be its mud brick cities. Across the oasis, archaeologists uncovered settlements built almost entirely from sun-dried mud brick. Under normal conditions, mud brick is fragile. Rain destroys it, wind erodes it, temperature fluctuations crack it apart. Even modern adobe structures require constant maintenance. Yet parts of Dakhla's ancient cities survived for more than 2 millennia in the Sahara. At sites like Kelis and Balat, entire walls, storage rooms, towers, and administrative buildings remained standing despite centuries of desert exposure. Some structures date back to the Old Kingdom period, nearly 4,000 years ago. This durability has become a serious engineering puzzle. Material analysis revealed that these bricks were not simple mixtures of mud and straw. Many contained highly controlled proportions of clay, fine sand, salt minerals, and organic fibers. Under microscopic examination, researchers found dense internal bonding patterns that reduce thermal cracking. Some bricks even appear to have undergone natural mineral stabilization over centuries, essentially hardening with age instead of weakening. The thermal challenge alone should have destroyed them. In the Sahara, surface temperatures can swing by more than 30 degrees Celsius between day and night. These constant expansion and contraction cycles normally fracture earthen materials rapidly. Yet many Dakhla walls resisted this process for centuries. Some researchers believe ancient builders intentionally selected mineral-rich sediments containing evaporite salts that later crystallized inside the bricks, reinforcing them naturally. Even more mysterious is the city planning itself. Streets in several settlements were extremely narrow, sometimes barely wide enough for 2 people to pass comfortably. Initially, archaeologists assumed this reflected overcrowding. Later, climate simulations suggested something very different. The narrow corridors dramatically reduced solar heating while channeling wind through the city, like a passive cooling system. Thick mud brick walls acted as thermal batteries, absorbing heat slowly during the day and releasing it gradually at night. Modern sustainable architects now use similar principles in eco-city designs. Computer models comparing Dakhla's urban layout with modern desert architecture showed that interior temperatures inside some buildings could remain 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, cooler than the outside environment without any mechanical cooling. That level of passive climate control rivals techniques used in some modern, energy-efficient structures. The engineering becomes even stranger when examining airflow systems. Several buildings contain elevated openings and angled ventilation shafts, resembling early wind catchers, a technology often associated with Persian architecture centuries later. These systems created pressure differences that pulled hot air upward while circulating cooler air through living spaces below. In effect, ancient builders created natural air conditioning systems in the middle of the Sahara. Another unresolved mystery involves transportation and navigation. Dakhla was not isolated. Ancient caravan routes connected it to the Nile Valley, Karga Oasis, and regions deep into Africa. Yet these routes crossed hundreds of kilometers of nearly featureless desert terrain. Satellite surveys revealed many roads maintained remarkably straight trajectories across barren landscapes where even modern travelers struggle without GPS. How ancient traders navigated these routes with such consistency remains debated. Some researchers suggest astronomical navigation using star positions. Others believe travelers memorized geological formations invisible to outsiders. More controversial theories propose knowledge of localized magnetic variations or inherited mapping traditions lost over time. What makes the mystery more compelling is that many routes connect almost perfectly with hidden water sources and strategically spaced rest points. Burial sites at Dakhla added another layer to the puzzle. Excavations uncovered naturally preserved human remains, with intact hair, textiles, and soft tissue surviving for more than 1,000 years. Desert preservation alone explains part of this phenomenon, but some tombs appear intentionally designed to accelerate natural mummification. Researchers identified burial orientations and sand compositions optimized for rapid dehydration and bacterial suppression. Certain tomb materials contained resin compounds with antimicrobial properties, similar to those used in elite Egyptian mummification practices. Climate history may be the biggest hidden mystery of all. Geological evidence shows the Sahara was not always a hyper-arid wasteland. Thousands of years ago, parts of the region contained lakes, grasslands, and seasonal rainfall. Ancient inhabitants of Dakhla may have witnessed long-term environmental collapse unfolding across generations. Some scientists believe oasis settlements were strategically engineered responses to increasing desertification. Water storage systems, agricultural layouts, and settlement placement may reflect sophisticated climate adaptation strategies far beyond what historians once assumed ancient societies could achieve. That possibility changes the way researchers view Dakhla entirely. Instead of a remote desert oasis surviving by luck, it may represent one of humanity's earliest large-scale experiments in sustainable living under extreme environmental stress. And yet enormous gaps remain. No surviving manuals explain how these hydraulic systems were designed. No detailed engineering texts describe the mud brick formulas. No records fully reveal how desert navigation networks operated with such reliability. Archaeologists can measure the structures, analyze the minerals, and simulate the airflow, but much of the practical knowledge behind Dakhla's survival vanished long ago beneath the Sahara sands. Do you think the builders of Dakhla possessed environmental knowledge far beyond what historians currently believe? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Southern Iraq, near the dried marshlands of Di-Qar, hides the buried ruins of Girsu beneath layers of desert like the remains of a forgotten machine. More than 4,000 years ago, this Sumerian city controlled water, engineered climate-resistant temples, and managed one of the earliest bureaucratic systems on Earth. yet many of its technologies remain only partially understood. Girsu was first identified in the late 19th century by French archaeologist Ernest de Sarzec after local discoveries of strange inscribed statues near the mound of Tello. Excavations quickly uncovered thousands of cuneiform tablets, massive temples, canals, and diorite sculptures so advanced that some researchers struggled to explain how Bronze Age tools could have produced them. But the greatest mystery of Girsu may not be its statues or inscriptions. It may be the fact that an ancient civilization, living in one of the harshest climates on Earth, developed engineering systems that resemble environmental technologies still used today. The city flourished around 2500–2100 BCE inside the state of Lagash. At its peak, Girsu was not a primitive settlement but a carefully organized urban center connected by canals, warehouses, temples, workshops, and administrative archives. Satellite surveys show that the surrounding region was covered with artificial waterways extending across enormous distances. Some channels were engineered with slope variations so subtle that modern archaeologists measured differences of only a few centimeters over hundreds of meters. That level of hydraulic precision is difficult even with modern surveying equipment. Without lasers, modern mathematics, or steel instruments, the Sumerians somehow created a stable irrigation network capable of controlling floodwater from the Tigris and Euphrates. If the gradient had been too steep, the canals would have eroded. Too shallow, and the water would stagnate into salt marshes. Yet many sections functioned for centuries. Researchers have compared the system to early versions of Roman hydraulic engineering developed nearly 2,000 years later. Some believe the Sumerians used water-level observation techniques combined with astronomical alignment to maintain accurate elevation measurements. Others argue the canal system evolved slowly over generations through experimentation. But no fully successful reconstruction using only Bronze Age tools has ever reproduced the same large-scale precision. Still, the canals are not the strangest part of Girsu. Among the most mysterious structures ever uncovered, there are the temple complexes dedicated to Ningirsu, especially what archaeologists sometimes describe as the White Temple structures because of their reflective outer surfaces. These buildings were constructed primarily from mud brick, one of the weakest building materials in extreme weather. Southern Iraq experiences brutal environmental conditions. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius, while seasonal flooding and salt-rich soil rapidly destroy exposed structures. Under those conditions, ordinary mud brick should have eroded within decades. Yet parts of Girsu's sacred architecture survived for millennia. Analysis of surviving plaster and wall fragments revealed unusual mixtures of clay, gypsum, ash, crushed reeds, mineral salts, and organic compounds. Some layers appear intentionally designed to reflect solar radiation while reducing internal heat transfer. Thermal studies conducted on comparable Mesopotamian materials suggest certain reflective plasters could reduce interior temperatures by several degrees compared to untreated mud brick. This has led some researchers to compare Girsu's temple coatings to passive cooling systems seen much later in Persian desert architecture. Structures like the Yakhchals of Iran used reflective surfaces, thick insulation, airflow manipulation, and evaporative cooling to preserve ice in desert conditions. But Girsu predates many of those systems by more than 1,000 years. The unanswered question is how the Sumerians understood the thermal behavior of materials so effectively. Some temple walls were extraordinarily thick, creating thermal lag that delayed heat transfer into interior chambers. In modern architecture, similar principles are used in passive climate control systems, designed to stabilize indoor temperatures without electricity. Computer simulations of ancient thick wall construction show that heat may take many hours to penetrate dense earthen structures, meaning interiors remain cooler during the hottest parts of the day. But Gersu's builders may have gone even further. Certain excavated surfaces appear to contain microscopic crystalline structures formed through repeated heating and mineral interaction. Some specialists suspect the builders accidentally created primitive ceramic-like weatherproof coatings during firing or drying processes. Others believe the mixtures were intentionally refined after generations of experimentation with local soils and salts. No one knows exactly which formula they used. Even modern restoration teams struggle to reproduce ancient Mesopotamian plasters with identical durability under the same environmental conditions. Some experimental reconstructions cracked rapidly after exposure to heat and salt, while ancient fragments from Gersu remained stable for thousands of years underground. And the mystery deepens when examining the city's stonework. Gersu became famous for the statues of ruler Gudea, carved from imported diorite. Diorite is an extremely hard igneous rock with a moss hardness approaching 7, comparable to granite. It is notoriously difficult to shape even with iron tools. Yet the statues display smooth curves, polished surfaces, symmetrical geometry, and tiny cuneiform inscriptions carved with astonishing control. Microscopic studies of certain cuts revealed abrasion patterns consistent with quartz sand polishing and rotary drilling techniques. Experimental archaeologists attempting to replicate the carvings using copper tools found the process painfully slow. Some estimates suggest a single statue could require tens of thousands of labor hours. Yet Gersu produced many. The city also maintained one of the earliest large-scale administrative systems ever discovered. More than 30,000 cuneiform tablets from the region document grain distribution, taxation, labor assignments, livestock inventories, temple offerings, and trade logistics. Scholars often describe the archive as a proto-bureaucratic data network. The remarkable part is not simply the existence of records, but their standardization. Many tablets follow strict accounting formats with numerical systems, official seals, categorized inventories, and organized storage procedures. In effect, Gersu developed a civilization-scale information management system nearly 2 millennia before classical Greece. Some historians argue that writing itself evolved largely because societies like Gersu required increasingly sophisticated methods of resource tracking. Without centralized data management, the city's irrigation economy may have collapsed under its own complexity. And then there is the sky. Several structures in Gersu appear aligned with astronomical events connected to lunar cycles and the heliacal rising of Sirius. The Sumerians closely linked celestial movement to agriculture, flooding, and ritual calendars. Certain temple orientations deviate only slightly from predicted ancient stellar positions. This has fueled debates about whether the city used observational astronomy as part of urban planning itself. If true, Gersu may represent one of humanity's earliest examples of architecture synchronized with long-term celestial observation. Yet despite all this sophistication, the civilization eventually declined. One major theory blames soil salinization. Continuous irrigation in hot climates causes salt to accumulate near the surface, slowly poisoning farmland. Archaeological evidence suggests wheat production in southern Mesopotamia collapsed, while salt-tolerant barley became dominant. Some estimates indicate agricultural productivity may have fallen dramatically over centuries. Ironically, the same hydraulic mastery that allowed Gersu to flourish may also have contributed to its destruction. Other theories point to river migration, political fragmentation, drought cycles, or economic overcomplexity. Whatever the cause, the once powerful city faded into ruin, eventually buried beneath layers of desert sediment. Do you think Gersu was destroyed by nature, or by the very technology that once made it powerful? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The plains surrounding the Danube River in modern-day Serbia and Croatia reveal traces of a Bronze Age civilization that should not have existed at this level of technological sophistication nearly 4,000 years ago. Known today as the Vatin culture, these settlements left behind precision bronze weapons, mathematically balanced ceramics, engineered flood-resistant villages, and evidence of trade networks stretching across hundreds of kilometers. Yet they never built giant pyramids, massive palaces, or written records explaining how they achieved it. The strangest part is that the more researchers excavate these sites, the more the technology appears far ahead of what historians once believed possible for Bronze Age Central Europe. The first major Vatin discoveries emerged during excavations across the Pannonian Basin in the early 20th century, especially near the Danube corridor. Archaeologists initially assumed the settlements belonged to scattered farming tribes, but layer after layer revealed standardized metallurgy, organized settlement planning, and ceramics so geometrically precise that some experts compared them to much later Anatolian craftsmanship. What makes the Vatin culture unsettling is not one giant mystery, but a collection of smaller anomalies that together form a civilization that appears technologically out of place. One of the greatest mysteries involves metallurgy. Chemical analysis of surviving bronze weapons revealed unusually stable tin concentrations across artifacts found far apart from each other. In Bronze Age metallurgy, maintaining consistent tin ratios was extremely difficult because furnaces lacked thermometers and temperature controls. Yet many Vatin blades contain remarkably similar alloy compositions, suggesting a controlled manufacturing tradition rather than random experimentation. Bronze typically becomes harder and more durable when mixed with around 8–12% tin. Several Vatin artifacts fall directly within this effective range. That level of consistency implies knowledge of heat behavior, cooling control, and alloy balancing centuries before such sophistication was expected in this region. Even more mysterious is the lack of industrial evidence. Archaeologists have uncovered the weapons themselves, but very few large-scale smelting centers. There are no giant furnace complexes comparable to later Mediterranean metal industries. Somehow, enormous quantities of bronze tools and weapons were produced without leaving behind the infrastructure historians would expect. Some researchers believe the Vatin people may have used decentralized production systems, many small workshops distributed across river settlements instead of one major industrial center. If true, this would resemble surprisingly modern production logistics rather than primitive tribal craftsmanship. Their trade networks deepen the mystery even further. Artifacts associated with the Vatin culture contain materials linked to distant regions across Central and Southeastern Europe. Amber from northern trade routes, bronze materials tied to Carpathian mining zones, and stylistic influences resembling Aegean cultures suggest an interconnected network spanning hundreds of kilometers. This is difficult to explain because transporting heavy metal ore across Bronze Age Europe was incredibly dangerous and inefficient. Dense forests, seasonal flooding, and lack of paved roads should have severely limited long-distance movement. Yet the Danube River may hold the answer. Some archaeologists believe the Vatin culture mastered river transportation on a scale previously underestimated. The Danube stretches nearly 2,900 kilometers across Europe, and even primitive rivercraft could move cargo far more efficiently than overland caravans. If Vatin communities systematically used the Danube as a transportation corridor, they may have controlled one of Europe's earliest large-scale trade highways. That possibility changes how historians view Bronze Age Europe entirely. Instead of isolated tribes occasionally exchanging goods, the continent may already have contained interconnected economic systems thousands of years before classical civilizations emerged. Another mystery lies beneath the settlements themselves. Excavations at several Vatin sites revealed evidence of engineered flood adaptation. Many settlements were built on artificially elevated layers of earth, with repeated rebuilding over generations creating raised habitation platforms. In flood-prone areas near the Danube, this strategy would have protected homes from seasonal water surges. The engineering implications are enormous. Constructing elevated settlement layers required coordinated labour, planning, and long-term environmental observation. The inhabitants needed to understand how floodwaters moved across plains and which soil compositions provided structural stability. Some defensive ditches surrounding settlements also appear unusually symmetrical, suggesting organised surveying techniques. Compared to many Bronze Age European cultures, Vatin settlements appear less random and more intentionally designed. But perhaps the most disturbing mystery of all involves their ceramics. The pottery discovered across Vatin sites should not be this precise. Many ceramic vessels display extremely thin walls, highly symmetrical shapes, and repeating geometric patterns applied with astonishing consistency. Under close analysis, some decorative motifs maintain near-identical spacing around curved surfaces, something difficult to achieve even with modern handcrafting techniques. Researchers studying these ceramics notice several unusual characteristics. The firing temperatures appear unusually even across many vessels, indicating controlled kiln environments rather than open-fire baking. Surface coloration often remains remarkably uniform, suggesting stable oxygen exposure during firing. Some vessels also display radial symmetry so accurate that archaeologists suspect the use of rotational shaping systems similar to primitive pottery wheels. That is controversial because advanced wheel-assisted ceramic production is not widely associated with many Central European Bronze Age societies of this period. The mathematical consistency becomes even stranger when comparing vessel geometry. Several bowls and storage containers maintain proportional balance between rim diameter, body curvature, and base width with surprising regularity. This suggests either repeated measurement systems or inherited manufacturing templates passed through generations with minimal deviation. Some researchers have proposed that Vatin artisans may have used cord-guided rotational tools, marked measuring sticks, or primitive calibration methods to standardize pottery dimensions. But no direct evidence of these systems has ever been found. And this is where the mystery becomes deeply unsettling. Precision normally leaves behind precision tools. Roman engineering left surveying instruments, Egyptian stoneworking left copper tools and unfinished cuts. Medieval workshops left molds and measurement devices. But at Vatin sites, the ceramics often appear more advanced than the surviving production evidence itself. It is almost as if the technical knowledge survived longer than the tools used to create it. Microscopic analysis has also revealed extremely smooth finishing on some ceramic surfaces. In certain examples, polishing marks suggest multi-stage finishing techniques before firing, requiring both time and highly specialized craftsmanship. Some decorative incisions remain so evenly spaced that modern archaeologists struggle to reproduce them consistently by hand. Compared to neighboring Bronze Age pottery traditions, Vatin ceramics often appear unusually disciplined and standardized. This raises another possibility. The pottery may not have been purely artistic. Some historians suspect standardized ceramic volumes could indicate controlled storage systems for grain, oil, or trade goods. If true, the pottery itself may reflect an early form of economic regulation, standardized containers for taxation and distribution or commerce. That would push the Vatin culture far beyond the image of scattered Bronze Age villages. What do you think really caused the mysterious disappearance of the Vatin culture? Climate collapse, broken trade networks, or something historians still haven't discovered? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.